You're listening to the Joel Martin Mastery Podcast, home of the 2-hour deep dive interview with gold, platinum, and multi-platinum bands, including Stained, Blue Rodeo, The Arkells, Finger 11, Big Wreck, Moist, Bedouin Soundclash, I Mother Earth, Ill Scarlet, Neverending White Lights, Thornley, and many more. Please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast, as well as share, comment, and like. Now let's dive in to today's episode. Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of the podcast. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. We are joined by a very special guest. He's achieved a level of mastery as a recording engineer, having worked with artists like Our Lady Peace, Nelly Furtado, DMX, Big Sugar, Blue Rodeo, just to name a few. And he's also a member of the supergroup Envy of None with Alex Lifeson of Rush, with Andy Curran of Coney Hatch, and with singer-songwriter Maya Wynn. So welcome to the podcast. Welcome back, your triumphant return to Alf Annibalini. Alf, how are you? And can you believe it's already been 9 months since the release of Envy of None's debut album?
Well, Joel, thank you for having me on again. We had such a good time last time, and a great talk. Thank you for this. Yeah, I can't believe the time's passed that fast. And you know, it's been a really interesting ride this year so far. Let me just put it that way. It's been cool.
Yeah, it's wild to see the updates of this single does this, and this is happening in this country, and then money raised for this charity, and then new album on vinyl, and then this contest, and just all different things coming out. And does that keep you on your toes? You wake up every few days and there's something going on that keeps life exciting?
Well, I'm part of a really, really cool organization with this project. And there are times, quite honestly, that I'm like, oh, I didn't know we were doing that. That's cool. And so, yeah, it keeps us on our toes. But there's a lot of work that we're really, really proud of too. Specifically, the things that we did for raising money for refugees in the Ukraine and stuff. That was really, to me, that's probably the most important thing that we accomplished all year. I mean, I'm glad people like the record, and I'm glad that there's a lot of supporters out there, but I'm really, really proud that we were able to do that.
For our listeners that are not familiar with what you did to raise money for Ukraine, can you share that with them? So there was a single, and then what's happened over those 9 months? It's pretty amazing.
Well, what we did was when the record came out in two formats. It came out in a deluxe format, and it came out as the standard record. And the deluxe format had some remixes on it and some different versions of songs, but it also had two entirely, completed songs that nobody had ever heard before, and they were included. And one of them just happened to be a song called "You'll Be Sorry," and I think it was Maya actually that came up with the idea that maybe there was a way for us to package something for people to be able to purchase and then donate the money to refugees through an organization in Canada here, the UNHCR. I always get that wrong. But they agreed. They thought it was a really good idea. Our record label agreed, and the merch company decided to sort of like quarterback the whole thing. And we came out with a package that was a 7-inch single that had "You'll Be Sorry" on one side and the song from the main album called "Enemy," which was kind of appropriate because it was basically it's a commentary on being peaceful and why are we fighting and how things can get out of hand, and yet that never really has to happen, and yet sometimes our biggest reaction is to violence or something along those lines. It just seemed like it was an appropriate choice in terms of both songs. So we put those together on a 7-inch single that the label managed to sort of come up with the artwork, and they altered the artwork for the record so that it had Ukrainian colors, the yellow and the gold and the blue. And they did the same thing with the 7-inch single, and they split it in half. And so we signed them, and they proceeded to sell them and raise some money for it. So it was cool. It was a really cool thing.
The last time I checked, it looked like doing that had raised over $100,000 for the Ukraine. I mean, that's that's amazing. Like that's such an incredible result. I mean,
Yeah.
even if you raise $2,000 or $5,000, anything you can do makes a difference. But 100,000, that's a significant sum to help
It
out.
was, it's overwhelming. It's absolutely overwhelming. And I remember, yeah, it's kind of my first kick at the can. I mean, there's little organizations that I donate to, CNIB and places like that for for guide dogs and whatnot. But I never really done anything on this kind of level, and I had no idea what to expect. And I thought, oh God, well, if we can raise everything's donated, so if we can raise $10,000, amazing. And it was absolutely overwhelming. But we also did Zoom meetings, which were kind of interesting. So you could buy a Zoom meeting and hang with us for half an hour and ask us questions and stuff. And that actually generated a significant amount of money as well. So,
So there were packages available.
yeah, they had different packages. You could buy you could buy the record or the 7-inch. You could buy a signed version of the 7-inch. You could meet with us for half an hour, and they're all different tiers of donations. And so when all was said and done, I think it was 122,000 or something.
That's so wild.
Yeah, crazy.
That's amazing. So the first time that you were on this podcast was back in April. So this is on episode 56. And that's where we did the full 2+ hour deep dive. We went through your entire life, your career, your discography. So for listeners tuning in for the first time, go back to episode 56 if you want the full story, everything in depth, more than you could ask for. And then today, this is a part of a new series called My 5 Favorite Albums. So we're gonna do a little bit of catching up on the last 9 months with you, with Envy of None, and then we're gonna dive into your 5 favorite albums of all time. And it's an eclectic mix of albums. I really enjoyed sinking my teeth into it because these are not shallow, superficial albums. These are like super deep. You need great headphones. You need multiple listens. They're what's the word for this? It's like there's these subtle things going on, and there's a ton of depth to them. So we'll unveil what those 5 albums are in a second, but sure. You can go back to episode 56 for the full deep dive for everyone. That was 9 months later, after all the guests I've had. That's still in the top 10 most downloaded episodes of all time, not just of 2022. And every time I tell you that, you do what you just did. You shake your head in shock. Why are you so shocked that it's a top 10 album, top 10 episode?
Because I've seen quite a few of the other guests that you've had on, and I'm like, I don't really understand why somebody would be interested in what I'm doing, but I'm very flattered and very grateful. So, and again, just really, that was a really fun day though. We had a good time. That was a good chat. And I think maybe it comes across,
Yeah, that we actually like each other,
Yeah.
So, so I have in your honor on the wall beside me here, the Envy of None album cover. So it's a beautiful, well-designed album cover. These are my 12 favorite albums from guests I've had on the podcast. So it's kind of the wall of fame. So it's right here. And I'm pointing it out because you guys release this on vinyl. You can get it on vinyl, and vinyl is awesome because you get the amazing album cover at a size that allows you to really appreciate it. So can you talk a little bit about the vinyl, how you guys decided that you did want a vinyl release? There's like a resurgence in vinyl sales now, and how you're able to put that together. It can't be easy during a global pandemic with shortages and manufacturing to make that happen. So can you give us an insight on the vinyl release?
Yeah, we're really, really fortunate. We have a dear friend that works at Precision Lacquer, and he helped us out with this a lot, and kind of helped spearhead the whole thing. But we also have, and forgive me because I can't think of their name right now, but there's a company that the record company uses out of Germany as well that takes care of the European end of it, and I'm pretty sure no, it was Precision Lacquer that did the 7-inch for Ukraine. And we have some good partnerships on it, but the label that we signed with, one of their things is artwork. And they remind me a lot of like when I was a kid growing up. It's not listed as one of the records that we're going to talk about, but I was a big fan of the Pixies. And but the Pixies were on 4AD, and 4AD was known for having like artwork that was just a little bit different than every other label, and it just looked very high class, and it looked amazing. And K-Scope, which is our label, is kind of, they remind me of 4AD in the sense that they really spend a lot of time worrying about, or not, I shouldn't say worrying. They spend a lot of time in the details of the packaging, and they're very much, let's do vinyl and let's do different versions of vinyl and let's come up with artwork that's memorable. A lot of the bands on that label are progressive rock bands, so probably, gearing towards a demographic that appreciates vinyl and appreciates the packaging and appreciates being able to open up and take a look at the book, the booklets or whatever it is inside the record. So they hit us with the idea of doing vinyl, and we of course jumped at it, and we thought it was a fantastic idea. And they came out with different versions of colored vinyl. So there's a see-through blue, dark blue that was with the deluxe package. A white version of vinyl, which I'd never seen white vinyl before, let alone see it on your own record. I was like, what? This is the coolest ever. And a light sort of blue that's very similar to the color of the actual artwork on the front for the States. So there was different types and different styles of vinyl that came out. And it came out on cassette as well.
Wow.
I was like, what decade are we in? So hang on a second. My record came out on vinyl, it came out on CD, it came out on cassette, and it's on streaming platforms. So it's like, what is going on? So
the first car that I got, so this is, I don't know, 16 or 17, and my parents buy me like a really crappy car so I don't keep taking there. So I had a Buick Skyhawk, and it was at a time where that, because it was such an old car, even when I got it, it still had the cassette player, and people made fun of me. And I actually had to buy a CD player to put in. That's how old it was. So
I'm trying to think of, my father had a Skylark. So I'm thinking that would have been an older vehicle too. But because that's where all the rage, man. We used to have if you loved the record, you bought it on vinyl. If you weren't sure about the record, you bought it on cassette.
Oh, wow.
And if you were trading the record, you got the vinyl from somebody else and you made a cassette of it. So cassettes were like everywhere, and the boom boxes and things, right?
I remember we used to have cassettes, and you'd listen to the radio, and when a song came on that you love, you could record the song, you could make your own mixtape that way.
Yeah.
The younger kids listening have no idea what we're talking about right
now.
they
have absolutely no idea what we're talking about. And I remember clearly, like, making, say it's a Friday night is coming up and somebody's having a party, and you got to make some music. You got to make a mixtape for that.
You need some bangers for your party.
I would spend like lots of time, with my cassette deck and getting the levels just right and making sure that I, picked all the right songs. It was fun. But that's where the whole, when somebody are like, oh, it's my new mixtape. I'm like, dude, it's like a bunch of songs on an MP3 playing back to, it's not a tape.
Yeah, so. I actually normally every year for my birthday, I have a massive house party. I have like 100+ people in my house. I haven't been able to do it in 3 years because of the pandemic. This Saturday, I will be having my first birthday house party in 3 years. And, instead of 100, it'll be, I don't know, 14 people or something. But I'm actually in the process of making my mixtape. But these days it's Spotify. I go in and have like a birthday party bangers playlist and select out of every song ever released. So that's the equivalent of the cassette mixtape.
Yeah, so cool. Yeah, it's your playlist thing, which is it's the same. It's the same deal as what it was, but a lot easier to access. Because you can just click on things and change them, as opposed to, you had to really commit. If you're like pulling out vinyl and putting it on a record and making sure the levels, you got to commit to that song.
Oh, we're playing that song 7 times that night if we went through that effort.
Yeah, absolutely. It was just like, when you get to the end of the mixtape, flip it over, play it again, because hey, that's the way it is. And you had different length tapes. So you had a 60-minute tape and a 90-minute tape. And boy, you had to have it together for the 90-minute tape, because that was a lot of work. That could take days.
You mentioned the Pixies when talking about album art. I remember the Pixies. I believe they're one of Nirvana's biggest influences.
Oh,
That Nirvana talked about them all the time, and without the Pixies, you don't get Nirvana's all-time great album, Nevermind.
yeah. Well, you don't get. I think without the Pixies, you don't get that quiet, loud, quiet, loud, quiet, loud thing. That was sort of It was the first time I heard anybody really do that. And they'd been doing it for a long time. I got introduced to the Pixies through a record called Doolittle. And then I kind of went backwards and got into Surfer Rosa and, you know, sort of did a deep dive on those guys. But, yeah, that they had that thing kind of going on where it was like really raw. And for the time, it was really raw. Now if you listen to it, it's not as raw as say something like Nirvana, but it was pretty raw at the time. And they just had this unique way of delivering a verse and then smashing you over the head with the chorus and then delivering a verse again. So it was kind of interesting. It was cool.
Yeah, after Nirvana, I remember being in bands and that's what was normal. You had a clean verse and you'd hit your distortion pedal and you'd have a heavy chorus. I thought that's just how songs were written. That became the standard at my age.
It's interesting, right? Because I'm obviously of a slightly different generation. So my thing was like more like layers and size. And I was always bummed out in bands when we would play like a song by Simple Minds or something like this, and we couldn't get the drums to sound the way they were on the record. I was always bummed out about that because they're just gigantic on the album. And I didn't know anything about processing, and I didn't know anything about recording. I didn't know anything about anything other than I could play about 3 chords on a guitar. So it's interesting. I probably would have been much happier in the Nirvana world because it's much truer to what you sound like in a rehearsal space, right?
Yeah, just raw energy captured with a few microphones.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the Envy of None album comes out about 9 months ago. Now you have some time where you can take a retrospective look at it. Over the 9 months, how has the response been so far from critics and from fans alike? I mean, I was checking out some metrics on Spotify. The album has over 1 million spins. I mean, it's hard to grasp what 1 million people, what that looks like listening to your album.
It was the numbers when it first came out. The numbers were just insane. I mean, for me, insane. Alex is probably a little bit more accustomed to this sort of thing, but I'm certainly not. And I think at one point we were like in the top 100 of all played artists on Deezer or something like this. Like it was crazy. And you can see the Spotify wears their metrics on their sleeve, right? That's their whole thing. So you see that very quickly. I don't know specifically how it did on Apple or anything like that, but the critical response to it was really, really positive. And I thought we were going to get a lot more backlash than we did. We got some because there's no big guitar solos and there's no 7/4 time changes on it, and there's no oh, that's funny, one of the members is calling me right now on the phone.
Yeah. Don't put them on the spot here. Maybe it's a very private, they're going to tell you they love Harry Potter or something that they'll never get back from public consciousness.
I need to admit to you, I just really like Harry Potter.
Yeah, I felt the need to call right now.
Yeah. So, but no, it's funny because there was this incredible response to it, and we got the odd comment that I would see on Instagram, or it's like, this is boring, it's not Rush or whatever, and it was never intended to be that. So overall, incredible reaction to it, and some of the metrics were like really overwhelming. So being able to sit back and watch it now, and the label's been incredibly supportive through the whole thing. Like they're constantly coming up with different ideas for promoting this and doing things, and so it's been really cool. But we've been sort of quietly busy behind the scenes as all of this has been going on.
So it was mostly the Rush fans that you thought there would be a backlash from.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, certain songs on that record, like Dumb, for instance, which is just, Dumb's kind of a Euro synth song. And the funny part about it was we recently, I think it was Guitar World magazine came out with their list of top 10 guitar albums of 2022. And I think we were number 6 or something, which was funny because one of the biggest complaints is nobody could hear the guitars. And I was like, well, clearly somebody can hear them. But a song like Dumb, which to the, the, if you're not paying attention to it, it sounds like a Euro dance tune, but it's all guitars. It sounds like synths, but it's all guitars. So we did a lot of heavy manipulation, and we didn't really worry about flashy guitar solos or anything like that. And I think, those were the kind of things that I thought, we're going to run into some problems with it. But for the most part, they're incredibly accepting.
Yeah, the guitar, it wasn't about riffs or solos. I mean, there is, there's at least one solo I remember on the album, like one legit solo, but it was more, to me, it was more like using the guitar as an instrument, like keys, where you can have different sounds with the keys, and it's just a tool in the toolbox.
Yeah, and we're all trying to a certain degree, I think for all of us, we're kind of pushing boundaries in certain ways. And playing things that are maybe a little bit more, like a little bit risky, in the sense that it's not a standard guitar part, or it's not a standard whatever. And for the most part, if it was a standard guitar part, either Andy or I played it, because most of the really crazy stuff that's going on and all the backwards things, which are actually played live, they're not necessarily digital manipulations by Alex. All that stuff, he really played it. He was given the freedom to just kind of look at it as an instrument and as a texture, and worry more about how it sits against her voice versus, how are we going to go into this part at 7/4 and just, whatever. Right. So it was just, I think in some ways it was very liberating. Well, it was definitely liberating for me, because nobody really cared about as long as we liked it, nobody really cared what the other person was doing, as long as it was good.
Yeah. Another poll that came up was, Andy Curran for, it was something like favorite bass players.
Bro.
Can you talk about that? That's pretty cool too.
Oh, it's amazing. And it's so deserved. It's so freaking deserved, man. The guy is unbelievable. Like, if you listen to that record's a tour de force on bass. It really is. Song like Look Inside, it's just like stereo pan bass, and we double tracked it, and we did just all kinds of crazy things with the instrument. And because we have that kind of freedom, right? We're not really adhering to anybody else's opinions about anything. So the way that we approach the bass and what we do with it is probably kind of unique unto our project specifically. And he deserves a lot of credit, man, because he comes up with these unbelievably cool bass lines, but also just lays them in a way that, and plays them against the groove, so that it's so good. It's so freaking good. And he changed entirely. He changed the way I produce records by the way he plays bass. I don't know if he knows that, but without question.
In what way?
Well, the first time I worked with Andy, I heard the rhythm section differently. And I'd been hearing other records where obviously they had that kind of a rhythm section on it. It was really tight and it was really aggressive. But it was the first time I actually heard that, and I could like look over, and the guy that did it was standing next to me. It wasn't some magical thing. It was just like, this dude can play his ass off, and this sounds, unbelievably solid. And it just changed. It gave me a perspective as to how important that instrument is in music, and in terms of just the arrangements and whatever. So now we push it up, man. It's like, it's up there in our mixes, because everything else is just color. That's part of the biggest fundamental of everything that's going on. So I'm really happy for him. I know he's quite humbled by it, especially when he was looking through the list. He was like, how's this possible?
Yeah, there's probably some other giants on that list, right? For fave bass
Yeah.
player.
Yeah. Well, even for us, like we were kind of a little humble too, looking at the other guitar players on the list.
Yeah.
One that we just lost, God bless him. But
yeah, you had Jeff Beck on there, I guess.
Yeah, Jeff Beck was on that list too. Yeah, that was tough. Yeah, we all took that one pretty hard.
Yeah, you would see all the tributes come in, all the people sharing their stories of how he influenced them as a guitarist, or all the music industry people I know talking about the time they worked with him, and you'd see a lot of people sharing their favorite live performances and videos, and you
Yeah.
start seeing the top 10 list of the top 10 best Jeff Beck solos or
Yeah.
top 5 songs. So I've been soaking in the Jeff Beck stuff over the last few days and digging into the music more than I was familiar with before.
Yeah, well, for a lot of people, it's a bit of an outlier, right? And like the Van Halen thing is obvious. The Van Halen thing is really, really obvious. But this guy, man, like if there's a song called "Where Were You" and it's off of his Guitar Shop album, I think it's like the fifth or sixth song on the record, and I heard that for the first time, and I was bawling by the end of the song. Like just like I don't even understand how somebody can do that with an instrument, let alone how somebody could write something that beautiful and put that much soul and feeling into it. And a record that is kind of like very sort of like big and brash and whatever, and this thing sits right in the middle of it. And then there's a live clip of him playing it at Ronnie Scott's, and it's like I still to this day every time I watch it, I just well up completely. And then you know, for anybody who really wants to see like a different side of how guitar, like the Van Halen thing, like I was saying, is pretty obvious because it's crazy and amazing. But this is like the most subtle way of watching somebody play an instrument. And then if you're a guitar player, you realize what he's doing as he's doing it, and he makes it look effortless, and his tone is unbelievable, and it's impossible to play, which is why nobody copies him.
It's very unique.
Yeah. So, anyway, that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah. So talking about Andy and his bass playing and all that stuff. It's funny. Andy keeps showing up in my life in different ways. So way back in the day, I worked a charity event with Rush to raise money for different charities, and that's where I met Andy. So Andy, working with Anthem and with Rush, he was organizing. So I first met him way back then. And then when I did the podcast episode with you, obviously we're talking about Andy there. And I believe he probably provided a quote for that episode, or he was involved with that. And then I get to Blue Rodeo episode, which is you recommending Glenn. So that's how I ended up with Glenn on the podcast. And Glenn talked about he was actually in a band with Andy Curran for a bit. And I got a quote from Andy for Glenn during that episode. And Andy said, Glenn loved playing with me because I never told him to play lighter, because Glenn is like a heavy drum player outside of Blue Rodeo. So there was that. And then I get to Big Sugar, who you've worked with. I have Gordy Johnson on. And while I'm doing my research for Big Sugar, I see that Andy Curran actually was one of the writers for their signature song, Digging a Hole. So Andy Curran literally comes up every few episodes I do. That's his fingerprints are on the Canadian music history landscape there. And I didn't know that until I see that through the episodes.
Oh yeah, if it's like Canadian or rock and roll, man, he's one of the forefathers, right? And again, like just an absolute sweetheart of a dude. You got to have him on. He's a great conversationalist, and he's funny and yeah. I would if I were you, I'd call him up immediately. Just kidding.
I have been in touch with him, and he is aware that there is an opportunity here. So we'll see.
Oh, fantastic! I'll put a bug in his ear and be like, "Go do it, man! It's fun."
Yes, thank you. Yeah. And I saw that Coney Hatch announced that they're actually going out on tour. So he's got more stuff going on.
Yeah, some weird. Yeah, they're playing with Kim Mitchell. I know that show's coming up, and that's a relationship that goes back to Kim Mitchell produced the first Coney Hatch record. So I mean, they go back to forever, those guys. And they were supposed to go on the road with British Lion, and some just logistics things came into play, and they weren't able to pull it off, which is sad because that would have been a cool tour. And they were going through England. I think it was like a month in England or something that they were going to do with this tour, and it kind of fell through. So I'm kind of bummed about that for them. Well, I'm not aware of any other sort of tour dates, but I know they've been pretty active.
Yeah, I thought I saw like a poster come up with an upcoming tour that they were back at it, which was exciting.
It's good. It's good to hear.
And I've been in touch with Maya, who
Yes,
is, it sounds like she has new music coming out. I believe there's a new album of her solo stuff around April coming out. That's what I'm hearing. And she will be a guest of the podcast as well. So we're going to get the entire Envy of None crew at some point on this
that's
podcast.
that's wonderful. That's great. She's she's wise beyond her years, man. You'll see. You'll see when you talk to her. That's like, that she's an old soul, but she's such a talent. Yeah, she's been working on this record for a while, and I've done a little bit on it. Andy's done a little bit on it. Alex has done a little bit on it, and we've all sort of contributed in our own ways. And she went on a really big tour. I think it was in October. She was planning, or September, and she was planning on putting the record out earlier. And she got a bunch of opportunities to do this tour and a bunch of shows, and it just, life, right? So she took the opportunities, and then of course you finish that, you get into the holidays, blah blah blah, et cetera, et cetera. We had some things that we needed to get done, so that probably didn't help. So her record got pushed back a little bit, but I'm looking forward to hearing it, because the stuff that I worked on was really cool. That's all I've heard. I haven't heard anything else, but I'm such a big fan. She could sing me a menu at a Harvey's and I'd be excited.
Yeah. The all the tours, the shows she's done, the promo stuff, that's all going to help with the release of the album, right? It's all
Yeah,
building anticipation anyways. So
absolutely. And any the more we can do to raise her profile, the better off it's going to be for her too. So excuse me. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited for her. I want to see her get this thing out.
yeah, and her solo music is very different from Envy of None. Like, to show the breadth of her talent, it's not that she's pigeonholed in this one place. It's she's just super talented, can write great songs, can sing anything, and you can see the difference between the two projects. One of my pet peeves is when you have a band that has a signature sound, and then the singer, the lead, does a solo album, and it just sounds like another album from that band that they left to do something solo. That's like a pet peeve of mine. So I love when there's actually a big difference between the band sound and then the solo sound. It makes it feel like there's a reason, there's a reason why they put out a solo album. They had something else to do, something different.
Oh, she'd be a perfect example of that. I think for anybody that was excited about our record and has our record, there's a song in there called Old Strings, and I believe this is going to be on her album coming out. Her version will be coming out, and you'll get a chance to hear the version we heard first. And then, of course,
Envy of None did up.
yeah, I was trying to think of how to say that, but yeah, we nunned it up, as you would say. But it's a wonderful song, but it's like this Americana kind of like, almost like train crew kind of thing, and it sounds nothing like, and I mean nothing like, what's on our record. So and her stuff is kind of like that, it's very, very different. I mean, even the stuff that I played on probably ended up pulling it back a little bit more towards Envy, just because of what I do, but it's still nothing like that.
I remember when I dove into that Envy of None album to really get to know it and soak it in. I remember Old Strings. I had that in my top three
Yeah,
favorite songs from that album.
a beautiful song. The sort of the weaving in and out between her melody and what Alex is doing with the guitars, and man, I mixed that thing like 4 times, I think, and each time probably got it a little closer to the mark, a little closer to the mark, a little closer to the mark, and then finally hit it. And I'm glad, because that's the wonderful thing about working in this project is, you do something and somebody says, geez, I think this could be a little bit better here, or this could be a little bit better there. And of course we have such trust in what's going on. You just, oh, okay, fine. And then you hear their vision of it and you go, oh yeah, oh Jesus, yeah, that's exactly what it was supposed to sound like. What was I thinking? And that song is kind of kind of that was a beast, man. That took about 4 goes to get it right, but I'm really, really proud of that mix, and really, really proud of the songs and the parts that everybody contributed.
So I have two final questions about Envy of None, and then we can dive into your 5 favorite
Okay.
albums. So I'm going to read something here.
Yeah.
So I have a little quote. It says, Lifeson, so Alex Lifeson has stated he does not intend to participate in concert tours, but will do a few shows here and there. My question is you guys have yet to do the live performance, I don't think. Is there a possibility at all of any shows, even just one show in 2023? Not to put you on the spot, but I'm putting you on the spot as a fan.
Put me on the spot. Yeah. Okay. 2023. So in other words, this year, we've got some things that we have to deal with this year. We that I think are probably going to take a little bit of precedence over that. Again, we're not a functioning band per se, so other bands, while they're working on things, will probably, like say for instance the Arkells or something, as they're working on songs or whatever, they're getting ready to go on tour and rehearsing and doing all that sort of stuff, and we're just kind of working on things. So I guess that's dropping a pretty big hint right there, but but I think, once there's more material, there's probably more of a likelihood that there will be at least a couple shows, just because I don't think anybody wanted to play like the entire album front to back, which is I think what would have to happen, and it's a big thing. And I'm I'm speculating because I don't think he's never said this. Well, maybe he said it a couple times, but I mean, yeah, touring is probably not a thing that anybody wants to do, but playing some shows potentially, yes. But here's the issue, and I think once we put it out there, people would understand a little bit. And I've mentioned this to people that have reached out to me asking me the same question, but it's a really big sound, and everybody, including Maya, when they go and they play live, everything is generated by a human being. Like, I don't know if you've seen Maya play, but she literally plays snare drum, kick drum, and guitar at the same time.
I saw a video on her Instagram.
Yeah. So it's all a human being generating the sounds. And our sound for that record is big, which would mean that instead of sequencing it and playing the tracks and things like that, which I don't know if anybody really wants to do, we would probably need to be more of like a Massive Attack situation where there's just a lot of people on stage playing it. And
it's very layered, right?
Yeah, it's very layered. So to create the songs the way that we would like to create the songs and present them would take a lot of work and take probably a lot of people. At which point, then the question becomes, well, okay, how many shows do you do? And so is there an arrangement? Is there a live arrangement out there that makes sense, whether it be like financially or whatever, that makes sense for us to be able to play? And of course, because of the people involved, when we do whatever the first thing is that we do, when we do it, we want it to be like really good, not kind of like, oh, that was pretty, like we want it to blow your mind. So there's a lot of things at stake. So we don't take that question lightly. But again, the more music that gets generated, probably the more likelihood that something will happen.
So you've hinted at it, that there could be new music on the way, that perhaps you guys are working on new songs. Can you give the Envy of None fans that are listening any hint of anything that might be coming?
Yeah, I can. We just delivered a master to the label for an upcoming EP that will happen in and it's done. There's some we'd probably do some immersive audio mixes of it, which has some new music on it, and I'm pretty excited about it. I think we're all pretty excited about it, and that will happen for sure. And I mean, it's an ongoing process. We keep trading files back and forth. It's not anything that's ever stopped, and it hasn't stopped since the record came out and we were still doing it. So there are things that are ongoing.
And you said EP. So is that 3 song? Is that 6 song? Can you say any of that stuff? An EP is less than a full album. That's all I know.
Less than a full album. And as far as I know, it's 5 songs.
Damn, that's good. That's a good number.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, I'm excited, but I think it sounds really, really cool. We've got some cool things on there.
Are we thinking it would be a 2023 release?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I like it. We're on pace to just release new music every year if we keep going like this, right?
Well,
2022, 2023. I'm just
yeah,
I'm projecting is what I'm doing.
yeah, yeah. No, I get it. I get it. I have a feeling that 2023 is going to be a little bigger than that, but we'll see.
Sounds good. All right. I got all my envy of none questions out as a fan, so we can dive into the matter at hand here. So
Probably
let,
going to
let
get a phone call now. Why did you say that? No, I'm just,
yeah, you've said too much. This episode might just disappear.
oh,
It'll
too much.
people will it'll start right now where we talk about the five favorite albums. We'll
In
we'll
case
see.
anybody's wondering, I'm looking at the chart because my memory is so terrible that I'm actually looking at the list.
At your five favorite albums. So can we start by just listing off the five favorite albums so our listeners know what we're going to dive into? What I mean, this was tough for you to pick as a
Yeah.
lover of music, but what came to you? Five favorite albums of all time
You want me to go in order? Sure.
in any order. Your five
Order.
favorite.
Well,
Go ahead.
number one is Talk Talk, The Color of Spring, which is, yeah, that's my Desert Island album. If I had to, like, if there was one and somebody said you don't get to listen to music ever again unless it's one thing, that would be it. So Talk Talk, Color of Spring. The second one is Mule Variations from Tom Waits. Yeah, I that record to me is almost perfection in so many ways. And honestly, it's like it's not even one and two, it's more like 1A, 1B. The Peter Gabriel album Melt, which is the first record that I really got introduced to Peter Gabriel. I've been a huge fan of his. Not everything he does, but when I'm a fan and when I get it, boy, do I get it. And I got that record, man, that ran me over the head. So that was number three. Talking Heads Stop Making Sense is my number four choice, which for anybody who doesn't know that record is it's a live album. And it's a live album that came out with arguably one of the best concert movies I've ever seen in my life. It was just unbelievable. And it's sort of the culmination for everything that I loved about Talking Heads all in one, all literally on one record. And then the last one's kind of an outlier. Although I think, as I'm looking at the list, probably makes sense when you see Tom Waits Mule Variations and it's Sparkle Horse.
Okay, before you say it, I'm excited to hear you try to say the name of the album, which is like 270 characters or something.
Yeah, it's Viva Dixie Submarine Transmission Plot.
I love it. Okay, our listeners, you guys got that? Sparkle
Viva,
Horse.
yeah, a lot of people just call it Viva Dixie, but it's Viva Dixie Submarine Transmission Plot is the name of the album.
All one word, lowercase, just to make it
All
a little
one word,
harder to read.
way to make it way more confusing than it has to be. But yeah, that's my fifth album.
There we go. So I had mentioned before that all those albums they're very different. They're very unique. They're very strange. Some of them are dark. They're not really easy listening. Like
No,
a lot of them aren't pleasant listens, and that's the point. It's not supposed to be pleasant because of the lyrical content. Do you think that those five albums influenced who you became professionally as a recording engineer? So that's one question. And the other thing is, do you think those five albums influence the Envy of None debut album? Because I could take that album and look at the characteristics of the other five, and a lot of those are there, where your album is a bit darker, a bit dense. There's a depth to the lyrics, very layered. I would say that the production of the Envy of None album is like an extra instrument. So you have your vocals and your guitar. And I would say the production itself is like an extra instrument that's working alongside the musicians. Does any of that make sense?
absolute sense. And that is such a great way of putting it. I never thought of the production as being an extra instrument, but well, man, I'm stealing that quote. Yeah, it makes absolute sense to me. I like things that I like it when, you know, artists like David Bowie or something where you just fall in love with an album and you don't know what the next record's going to be. In fact, here's what you know about the next record is going to be nothing like the album that you fell in love with. The Pixies were a little bit like that. But all of these artists are kind of like that as well, you know. Talk Talk is this interesting thing because Talk Talk started out as a synth pop band, you know, and if you go back to their first It's My Life, for instance, the one that you know, no doubt had a massive hit with the single, or sorry, was it It's My no life's yeah, It's My Life. And like that record is a synth record, you know, very not like Depeche Mode, early Depeche Mode, but pretty poppy. But has its dark moments and its dark layers, and you can see that it was like there's this evolution that goes on within the career of that band, where it starts off very synthy, very sort of new wave or post new romantic, or however you want to label that, in the 80s, and it kind of turns into this thing where it's almost like an art rock record. Where if you listen to the two albums after the one that I'm in love with, uh, which are the Spirit of Eden and Laughing Stock, quite literally everything Radiohead does will make sense to you because they had to have been influenced by it. It's just there's no way that you can listen to those records and not see the parallel between them. So it's a big, massive evolution. So that band's a challenging band to listen to, especially if you're going to fall in love with them.
So let's dive right into that Talk Talk album then,
Yeah.
seeing as
Okay.
we've gotten started with it. So the album is The Color of Spring. This comes out in 1986.
Mhm.
So I'm 1 year old when that comes out. Just to so you know why I wasn't familiar with it when it was first released. I had to dive into it again here. When was the first time that you heard this album? Do you remember discovering it? Is it with the singles on the radio at the time? How does this come to you?
Well, I was looking for it because they were on my radar. I was a big fan of the record before that. And I think Much Music was all the rage back then. You know, everybody was getting their music from Much Music and MTV and so on and so forth. And so if that came out in 86, that would have made me 19 years old. So I'm living in Toronto. Yeah, I'm living in Toronto at this point. And I think I probably heard Life's What You Make It, the single, on and saw the video for it, which is a really cool video. It's basically the singer and a piano and lots of bugs in the forest. Very different for the time. It kind of stood out. It was very different, but the song itself to me is like nothing else that was on the radio at that time. There's no bass in the song. It's all just the bottom end of the piano, and it's this kind of part that just kind of keeps going over and over, and the groove is amazing on the song, and there's just so much depth to it, and the emotional content behind the way he's singing it, but also what he's singing, and the lyrical content. And I just remember thinking, yeah, I was waiting for this, and this is better than I had hoped. So immediately that meant let's go down to the record store and pick up the CD of it.
So you mentioned the one single, Life's What You Make It. That's the one that jumped out at you. There was three other singles. So Living in Another World, Give It
Yeah.
Up, and I Don't Believe in You. The recording is super clean. That's what stood out to me is it's just very clean, and every instrument has its own space, and it's like luscious. That's what stood out to me. It wasn't like a grungy record or like a dirty or an indie. It was just super polished, but not in, you know, the pop Justin Bieber sense of polish. It's the recording. It just sounded masterfully recorded to me.
It's, for me, one of the high points of pop music production in terms of just the way it was produced. The instruments that were chosen, because there's some really interesting, like there's harmonica on this thing, and there's you know, real strings and mellotron and dobro guitar, but acoustic guitar and electric guitars that don't sound like electric guitars. They sound more like, you know, an elephant getting stuck in a tar pit or something. And the drums, and this combination of percussion and program drums and B3 organ, and just all of these layers and all of these textures, and it's like this, you can hear this incredible conversation that's happening musically between all the musicians that are happening on any given song, and there's points where things are just ridiculously loud, but they only happen like for a split second and then they go away. For instance, I Don't Believe in You is a really good example of that, where you have like these you know, like just acoustic bass where it's just like there's growls that come out of nowhere, and you're like, what the hell? And they're just too loud, and then they go away. And
That's actually my favorite song on the album.
I Don't Believe in You.
Yeah.
Oh, it's crazy. It's crazy. That song is absolutely insane. Um, just the way it starts off with the harp of the piano and then the guitar part and then the harp of the piano and the guitar part and then the band kicks in and the groove. It's just like, are you kidding me? What the hell is going on? Amazing. But you're right. It's like everything has a friend of mine describes it like not that record, but he describes like good mixes like this where he says, you know, everything has it's almost like there's a home built around it so you can hear it specifically and all these little things that come in and out. But also, you know, when you go back and I was in sort of preparation for this, I went back and I looked at it and I just want to go through the lyrics again to make sure what was going on. Because when I bought the lyrics are in his handwriting, and his handwriting, you can barely read it. It's like, what the hell is this guy saying? And of course, he sings in a way that's so, it's almost like Tom York, you know, where there's points where you're just like, what? That's a great tone. I have no idea what you just said, though, or at least for me anyway. And one of the beautiful things about Spotify was being able to go and take a look at the lyrics and see what the actual lyrics for the song are. And I'm like, oh wow, I didn't okay. There was a resonance there that was happening that I thought was going on, and it turns out that is actually what he's saying. And wow, this is dark. This is really dark.
Yeah, you mentioned to me that this is a really dark album, and we're going to jump into the Peter Gabriel album. You said that one was dark as well. So is it the lyrics for you that make this album a very dark album, the lyrical content?
I think don't you know when I listen to it overall in you know at first Happiness is Easy, right? It's the first song on the record. It starts off with a drum beat that goes on for too long almost before the band actually kicks in. And then that's a perfect example of just song the bedrock is just sounds coming in and out. And when it goes into the chorus and you hear the little kid singing, because he just lays out and his little kid singing what happens at the chorus, because he says happiness is easy, and then the answer lines of these little kids, and you go and you read about what they're saying, and they're basically, you know, I don't know if they're reading like cataclysm or catechism or it's definitely, you know, based on religion, but the whole comment of the song is based on what you will do that's not, you know, uh basically moral or whatever on the basis of religion. You know, so there's this really you have these really sweet kids' voices, and yet the message is like, oh God. And then you go into I Don't Believe in You, and then Life's What You Make It. And then April 5th, which to me is like kind of hopeful in the sense that it's like, oh, here comes spring. But he just puts it in a way that you're like, what? This is so cool. And the way he sings on the outro of that song is a real precursor to like Laughing Stock and Spirit of Eden and where the band was going, kind of thing. So there's never really a moment where I feel it's happy, because even when it is happy, the stuff going on behind it's not.
The kid singing the darker lyrics, that's an equivalent in movies. Like the juxtaposition is like Jaws, where you have a scene of like a happy kid swimming, and then the music, the Jaws music, where you know something bad's about to happen. That's like the equivalent of it, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Right. And something similar to, you know, I remember like it gave me goosebumps the first time I heard it, but like, and you know, Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 did the same thing too, when the chorus, when you know, when the English choir comes in, the kids, and you're like, oh my God, you know, but I mean, God, the Stones did it. Everybody, you know, it's been done. It's an effective thing. But in that track, I thought, God, that's just so cool. And the groove,
Kids, they'll get you.
yeah, and the groove of it is just like, give me a break, man. So good.
What's funny that you mentioned Pink Floyd, Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 is this is the second episode of my 5 favorite albums. The first one I had Rich Bedeau of Finger
Yeah.
11, Saint Asonia, and he had The Wall in there. So it's kind of funny. Through the first 2 episodes, we're mentioning Pink Floyd here for all-time greats.
Well, yeah, you know, it's hard to deny that stuff. I wouldn't, for me, I like that record. I don't love that record though, but I like that record. But there's moments in it where it's just like, if you don't get goosebumps, you're dead inside. But
It's even if you don't love the record, you can't deny that there's genius involved in
no,
at least some parts of that, between the vision or the actual follow through of the concept, or the songs themselves, or the actual playing, you know, like the guitar solo in Comfortably Numb, or
yeah, right. Like, who writes a solo like that? Who has enough guts to write a solo like that or play it? Where it's like, I'm just going to play real slow and melodic, and you know, I'll be damned. This is what I want to do. I'm always as I say, I'm like, yeah, I don't, I like that record. I love that record. I just watched a documentary, well, it was a concert thing of Roger Waters. And I've always been kind of like, not really, I never really dug right in on Pink Floyd, but I remember watching this thinking, I'm getting goosebumps. This guy's killing me. This is amazing. Yes, I like this. So that's one of those. It's kind of like quinoa. I always go, no, I don't like quinoa, and then I have it, and I go, why don't I like quinoa? I like quinoa.
Yeah, you need to put aside your
Yeah.
you have this, there's something in you that is rejecting Pink Floyd for some reason. Do you prefer some of
And
their other all-time great albums? Like, do you like Dark Side of the Moon better than The Wall, or Wish You Were Here better than The Wall, or just as a whole, Pink Floyd is just, they're just a 7 out of 10 for you?
yeah, no, let's give him a 7.5
Okay.
with David Gilmour every now and then hitting the 9.
Okay.
Because I'm a guitar player.
Okay. You're there's the two camps. There's the Roger Waters camp, there's the David Gilmour camp. So you're more in the David
Oh,
Gilmour camp.
well, I'm definitely more in the Roger Waters lyrics camp. That's for sure. That's for that guy's, forget it. Um, no, it's amazing stuff, man. It's funny, It's like, I don't know how you rank something like that. It's like it's like an incredible work of art. Sometimes it's a little overdone for me, but no, I think Dark Side of the Moon, but Dark Side of the Moon probably because, I was in a band when we were like, I was 18 years old or something. No, it was younger than 17 years old. And we finished rehearsal, and I think somebody rolled a joint and we smoked it. And then they put on Dark Side of the Moon. And I went, oh my God, this is
That's
crazy.
how everyone gets into Pink
Yeah.
Floyd.
Yeah. Yeah. There's that sort of like, that sort of helping addition of the substance of a marijuana cigarette opened my eyes to the prism.
Of marijuana. We were talking about the song "Happiness Is Easy," the first song on the Talk Talk album. What stood out to me on that song is the guitars. So there's acoustic guitars.
Yeah.
One of them is strumming, and it's just super pleasant. It's just a very pleasant sounding. It's like a round sound, and then, these are funny ways of describing.
No,
And
it makes total sense.
and then there's very tasty, intricate guitar work that's more lead, and it sounds more like a nylon string guitar, or a classical guitar. So there's two completely different guitar sounds going on that I find stand out in that song.
Well, because they come into the lead parts come in spots where and they come in at times when the beat turns around too. So they'll play like a lick and then the beat will turn around underneath it. And it's almost jarring, but it's jarring with a really beautiful sound. So arrangement wise, it's kind of like the arrangement breaks up in a strange way, but it's pleasing to listen to at the same time. And yet, you got this dark sort of thing going on in the piano underneath it. And oh God, I just love it. I get goosebumps thinking about it.
You mentioned harmonica a few minutes ago. So I have a note. So living in another world, the harmonica was badass. So that's what I remember standing out.
Badass. One of these days I want to lift that harmonica part and try and play it on the guitar, which I won't be able to do. But oh man, that part is so badass. And I can't remember the name of the guy that played it, but because this is like, Steve Winwood's on that record. I believe John Lord from Deep Purple's on that record, if I'm not mistaken. Robbie McIntosh is one of my all-time favorite guitar players. And David Rhodes is Peter Gabriel's guitar player. Guitar players on that record. And along with the three guys from Talk Talk, who the bass player in Talk Talk is insane. Yeah, it's just such an incredible lineup, but I can't remember who the harmonica player. But yeah, living in another world, that harmonica solo is off the chart.
Let me know if my following statement is ridiculous. Okay. So while I'm listening to Talk Talk, I'm hearing vocally with the singer, I'm hearing similarities to the singer in Roxy Music. Does that make any sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Are you kidding? Also love that band.
I didn't know if I was crazy because I don't know Talk Talk that well, and I don't know Roxy Music that well. Yeah. So I didn't know if it's like a rookie mistake, me saying that.
God, no. That's actually something that I never thought of. And the minute you said it, I went, yeah, of course. Duh.
Just in the vocal delivery and the timbre of the voice. And
well, also as This is how astute as an observation that is. Um, One of the comments about Talk Talk when they first started out is that they came out as part of this new romantic sort of period, which a lot of people feel that Roxy Music was the beginning of all of that. So if you go listen to Country Life or something like this, and I just saw Roxy Music. Was it September? I want to say September or October. Andy called me and said, "I've got tickets. Let's go." So we went, and it was unbelievably smooth and just great to hear some of those songs played back live. Avalon's one of my favorite records too, but yeah, I think that's a great comment. Makes absolute sense.
All
And
right, I'm
kind of
not
quirky
crazy.
voice, kind of quirky voice, but kind of smooth at the same time.
Yeah, just like a beautiful, smooth delivery when they sing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I have one final thing about the Talk Talk album. So the album was included in the book, 1001 Albums You Must Hear Before You Die. So that's kind of a famous book. And if you get included in that, there's 1001 albums. It's like if aliens came down and they had to consume 1001 albums to get the best of the human race musically, that's the list. So I thought that was pretty cool that it was included in that.
Okay, that's surprising. Were any of their other records, the other two, afterwards? Because for a lot of people, like it, for a lot of people who are really into this band, the record that I chose is not the record they would choose. They would choose like Spirit of Eden, or they would choose Laughing Stock because they're kind of, you know. But this was like the perfect marriage to me of songs and the direction they were going and the direction they came from. And so that's cool that it was listed in that. That's amazing.
So let's dive into your another album in your top five. Let's do the Peter Gabriel album. So we had talked about the naming. He didn't name the first four albums. So this is the third album that he's released, and sometimes they call it Peter Gabriel 3. You called it Melt, and
Yeah.
a lot of people call it Melt because the cover art
Yeah.
is a picture of him, and it's like half his face is melting.
Yeah.
Is it? So Peter Gabriel 3 Melt, I guess, is how it shows up now on streaming sites. They had to make a decision. It's got to say something. So that's how they promote it. So we went from Talk Talk, which was one of the darker albums, and this would be probably the other darkest album. So we're going full dark to start this
Yeah,
year.
that's
So
fine. It's fine.
so
Well,
yeah, talk to me. Is that a reflection of you, your inner darkness? What why do you think you
yeah,
relate
maybe.
to all this?
Maybe. I just gravitate towards things that are a little bit on the darker side. I do. But not there were times when I was a metalhead, like I did a Voivod record, so that was pretty dark, and there were points when I kind of went down that road, and the darkness took me down that sort of heavier road. But for the most part, it's been more like atmospheric things and things like this, and because at the end of the day, it's melody, and these songs are just even Peter Gabriel, man, the melodies on that record are unbelievable. Like you get to the family snapshot, the after the whole story of how he's going to assassinate this person, which in itself is unbelievably dark. But when it gets to the point where the last line is I let the bullet fly, and then the next line is come back, mom and dad, and the piano part and the melody, I was just like, it's heartbreaking. It's absolutely heartbreaking. I think the first time I heard it, speaking about it now, I get goosebumps. Right. And I'm man, anytime somebody can do that to you when you're talking about something they did and you can be that moved emotionally, I think that's hard to put in hard to put into words. And you know, as dark as that is, it's like, the Spice Girl songs never did that for me. So maybe it's that emotion that I keep sort of like going after. Like things that make me do that. That's that Jeff Beck tune I mentioned does that to me. So it's almost addictive in a sense where it's like, this has evoked such an emotion in me that I have to keep trying to find music that does that. And he's done it to me often, you know, not just this record, but that's yeah, I think yeah, it's pretty dark. It's a pretty dark album.
Yeah, so this is considered his breakthrough album.
Yeah.
He had success with the other two, but this was like the mainstream breakthrough. And so All Music wrote that it established him as one of rock's most ambitious, innovative musicians. And just to give our listeners that haven't heard it yet, so hopefully they go and listen to these 5 albums, just to paint a picture for them, I got a couple cool things. So Gabriel jokingly summarized the album's themes as the history of a decaying mind, to
Yeah.
show you how dark that is. And then Rolling Stone praised Gabriel for a haunting LP that touches on political assassinations, the futility of war, and the brutal murder of South African activist Steve, how do you pronounce it again?
Even Biko.
Stephen Biko. And then they say he made more popular albums after this one, but never better ones. So that's from
Yeah.
Rolling
Oh, I
Stone.
couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree with that statement more. Yeah. The record that followed it, probably even darker in terms musically. Also unbelievable. I had Shock the Monkey on it, which was a big single. And then, of course, the real breakthrough was Sledgehammer after that, which, that record, when that came out, I remember hearing that on the radio and thinking, is that Peter Gabriel? That is Peter Gabriel. Okay, well, this is officially the coolest thing that's being played as a single right now. This is unbelievably cool. But I mean, it's as beautiful as that record is, and I love that record. It's this one to me, probably because it's the first one, man. I heard Games Without Frontiers on the radio, and I just thought this is unbelievable. And I was a big fan of New Wave, so it kind of fit into the Gary Newman Cars for me as a kid growing up. Because I think that record's. I'm not sure. Do you know the date on this record? I think it's
1980.
Okay, so they're kind of like back to back, right? And I remember hearing Cars on the radio and thinking, wow, this is like, whew, this is amazing. What is this? This is so cool. It's so different. And then hearing Games Without Frontiers on the radio and having the exact same feeling, except thinking this is darker and this has got more meat on the bones in terms of just the song itself and what it's all about. And the rhythms were different and not as straightforward and stuff. So, and that's kind of his whole thing, right? Is rhythm is a big part of the music that he creates, and the way that they approach the rhythms and things that he does on this record, where it's like there's no cymbals. You listen to the whole album, there's no cymbals. How do you accent a beat going into a chorus? Well, what do we all do? We all do cymbals. What does he do? It's like a drum martyr or something. And so it's just, there's automatically right from the beginning, there's a sound on that record that's kind of unlike everything else, because there's a gated drum sound that really, I don't even know if it existed before this. And it's that, for those people that are uninitiated in this record, anybody that's heard the tom fill in the air tonight in the middle of the song, this is the precursor to that. Same drummer, Phil Collins, playing it, but when Intruder comes in, the drums are just they're gargantuan. Like if you turn it up loud on your stereo, they're huge and punishing sounding. And then there's all these really creepy things going on. He's talking about breaking into somebody's home, which is just like, who writes a song about that?
And that's how the album starts, which
That's
makes it even,
yeah. I'm breaking into your house. And I like it when you feel uncomfortable and know that I'm breaking into your house. Like that's just, who writes that? And all the, of course, the really, and the jarring, like the uncomfortable musical stuff that's going on underneath it. Like they're playing chords, but the chords are all kind of like half sort of like, they're just like, what chord is that? I don't even know what that is. And it's just like almost like a cacophony happening behind this massive drum sound, but it's all sparing because it's just like pulse and no cymbals. And it's just, oh man. And then you've got like him singing background vocals with Kate Bush on that song through a cassette recorder, distorted, and then they play it back into the recording. It's just, oh yeah, it's just mind blowing.
You were saying that's the sampling with cassettes is that was very different.
Yeah, well, and he led into that later on. The record after that, there's a lot of recordings of these not musical performances, but like musical celebrations and things out of Africa, and he used a lot of that. But by the time they did the record afterwards, there were samplers, so you could take this cassette, record it into this machine, and then trigger it with a keyboard. And I don't know if any of that was happening on this record. I'm not really sure, but yeah, they were using all sorts of real weird sort of external sounds. But then, there's a marimba solo in the middle of the track, and you're just like, what is going on?
Can you uh educate our listeners on what a marimba is? I remember writing you saying I just started listening to the album and there's all this stuff I want to say about Intruder. And I said, I think there's like a xylophone or
Yeah,
like
well,
he's playing bottles or something weird. And you're like, oh, it's a marimba. I'm like, I'm gonna have to go on YouTube and watch someone
yeah,
playing marimba to know what this
marimba is,
is.
it's kind of like a xylophone, but it's wooden.
Hmm.
So the notes are all wooden. So when you hit it with you basically a percussionist, and I think it's Morris Pert playing the part, who's at the time was the percussionist on call for all of that stuff. In fact, he's playing on the Talk Talk album. And with a marimba, you have like basically these sticks with a ball in the end of it. So you get the sort of attack of it, and you hit these wooden sort of like bars, basically, or these little chunks of wood that are broken up and they're tuned to different notes.
Hmm.
It's got this really organic, weird sound to it,
I,
which
I've
makes in that song is kind of unnerving. In other songs, you're like, oh, okay, that's cool. But
I've heard that Peter Gabriel said no cymbals allowed. So I guess there was two drummers on the album. There's Phil Collins and someone else that I wasn't familiar with.
there's two brothers, the Murata
It's
brothers. I think
That's it.
he's Jerry Murata that's playing on that record.
I think so.
I think so,
That's
yeah.
and what's the brother's name? Do you know?
Oh, I'm sorry. Rick
Uh,
Rick
Rick.
Murata.
I
I
think
think
it's
it's Rick
Jerry.
Murata. Yeah, I think it's Jerry.
So my understanding is when he said no cymbals allowed
Mhm.
is what it was is instead of the drummers coming in and just phoning it in and doing what they normally do, that as soon as he says no cymbals, they had to rethink what it meant to be a drummer and how they could still get their performance across without all the tools they normally have, which made for very unique drum playing, which is genius. I mean, who does that?
Yeah, well, and that's a big risk too, right? Like let's get Phil Collins in. Let's get a great drum sound. Let's get in, well, not only like groundbreaking drum sound, and then let's force him to play it in a way that he's not used to playing and come up. And because it's Phil Collins, it's going to be genius. But let's put him and rip him out of his comfort zone and make sure that he's, completely, you know, has to approach this from a place where he's not going to fall into any kind of patterns of things that he's done before. And it's amazing. It's amazing to listen to. Like he plays on, and you can hear it. It's like in Through the Wire, the song "In Through the Wire." And there's just nobody else on the planet who's going to play drum fills like that, even though they've taken all this away from them. Like there's this approach to his snare drum when he does snare fills, and you're like, well, that's clearly Phil Collins because nobody else sounds like that. So it's a real, and that song has one of the best guitar riffs I've ever heard, and just angry, dry, perfect sort of like rock guitar and cowbell, which is just, so instead of a hi-hat, he plays cowbell. And the weird part about it is in the second chorus, if I'm not mistaken, he starts off with the cowbell and then he switches over to tambourine, like, and it's sort of like, what? Wait, and it doesn't make any sense. And clearly they just kept it. And it's very cool, man. That record's mind blowing.
Yeah, that's why it requires repeated listening because you
Yeah.
get all those little things you would never catch the
Yeah.
first time.
Yeah. And I don't know if you felt this, but if you listen to the whole record, you get to the end of it, and the end of it is Biko, the song Biko, which became a big, big, big live staple for him, because he sings this sort of like chant hook line at the end of at the end of the song, and eventually the crowd, and you can see it in lots of performances where the crowd just starts singing it and the band would just walk off the stage. And the crowd would be left just singing this chant of what's happening at the end of this song. It just goes on and on and on. It's amazing. But that song, the first time I heard it, I think I heard that record, fell in love with that record, and then heard Phil Collins' Face Value, which is the song that has In the Air Tonight on it. And I thought, wait a minute, this sounds an awful lot like Biko. Like a lot like it's got the same guitar tones, it's got the same sort of dark kind of thing going on. It's got the same sort of drum pattern happening. The difference with Biko is it's actually real. Those are log drums. Whereas I'm pretty sure with In the Air Tonight, it's like a Roland drum machine or something, but it's the same pattern basically. It's the same sort of guitar parts.
And you think one song influenced the other?
Oh, without question. Phil Collins.
They're both Phil Collins. Yeah.
Yeah, well, Phil Collins is the drummer on Biko. Just like it's not like he wasn't in the room; he heard it, you know.
Hmm.
So yeah, it definitely influenced him for sure, without question. Without
And
question.
and the song Biko, can you explain the
Yeah.
why it's called that and the story behind
Well,
it? It's a pretty
it's
dark one.
written about Stephen Biko, and Stephen Biko was fighting against apartheid and was actually, I believe, one of, I can't remember the name of the organization that they started to sort of draw attention to apartheid that was happening in South Africa, and he was one of the main guys. And this is around, I think, shortly after. And I could be wrong on my history because it's not like I've done a ton of reading on it, but um, I believe shortly after that's when Nelson Mandela was put in prison. But Stephen Biko was arrested and taken down to a police precinct, that absolutely perfectly healthy, and they killed him. He died in police custody, you know. So that old chestnut, but they killed him, and so this song is about that, and it starts off with chanting from his funeral, I believe, and then it slowly but surely sort of like builds into this thing that's just it's I remember the first time I heard it, and it was just like goosebumps from the minute I heard it, the goosebumps talking about it now. It's just incredibly moving, but it's also a very important piece of music.
And you were saying Games Without Frontiers is also political or has a
Oh,
statement.
absolutely. But yeah, it's a statement on war, you know, and just sort of the futility of what you know, just the idea of that I've got a rule and it's my flag, and God, we're seeing it now, the whole thing with going on with Russia and Ukraine. It's just like, come on, like, we're seeing it now. It's like, why do you want the Ukraine? What is it about the Ukraine that you want? Well, this is really easy to understand. It's money, oil, wheat, food, like, and to, this whole growth that I have to make Russia bigger and bigger and bigger and get back to the glory that we used to have. It's like, man, it's just ridiculous. These people are not your people. They're completely their own country. Leave them alone. And it's, that song to me resonates now. Just sadly, I don't know if there's ever been a time when that song doesn't resonate. I wish there would be. I wish there'd be a point where you go, wow, remember when people used to do that? But that's not the case.
Yeah, Peter Gabriel is known not just because he puts out great music, but he uses his voice to raise awareness, and he does a lot of stuff for charity and humanitarian awards and all this stuff. So I think that's another layer to what makes him an all-time great artist.
Yeah, it's funny because I had to. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And he breaks rules. He breaks rules. He breaks rules all the time. He's constantly breaking rules. And this is kind of funny. I did a degree at York in musicology, and one of the papers I had to write was actually on Peter Gabriel. We were given a whole bunch of topics, and you were able to choose whatever topic it was, and one of them was Peter Gabriel. And I was like, oh, I'm having that because nobody here knows who he is because they're all young kids. So I'm like, I'm on that one. And so I had to do a paper on him, and yeah, it was cool. It was really cool. But he's been that way ever since. Well, he's been that way forever. So it's just, if this is the way that, if there's a barrier here, I'm going to try and break it down. And this record definitely speaks to that without question.
One thing I thought was cool is the album comes out and it goes gold in 3 different countries, but in Canada it goes double platinum. So it's having success in Canada that's disproportionate to every other country, which is, that's you coming in and buying it in Canada.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea why it would be 4 times more popular sales wise in Canada versus any other country?
I don't know. It's actually the gentleman who's I consider a friend, and have very, think very fondly of. His name's Rob Bowman, and they call him the rock and roll professor, but he supervised my MA at York, and he interviewed Peter Gabriel when Peter Gabriel was doing his first record. his first solo album, which he was doing in Toronto. And so I think there's always been some kind of interesting connection between him and Canada for some reason. But it'd be interesting to see if that same disproportionate success existed with Genesis as well. Because maybe that's a carryover. I don't know.
That's a good point. I actually wanted to point out that it's so wild. Okay, so for an artist or a band to have massive success in the first place is super improbable. Like, just, even if you're talented, even if you have great music, there's a big element of luck, of whether you get signed or whether the label actually believes in you, whether the market is ready for what you're releasing. It's very hard to find success in music regardless of talent. So I find it wild that you have Genesis that is insanely popular. So there's one entity, Genesis, insanely popular. Peter Gabriel goes solo, insanely popular. Genesis continues, but with Phil Collins as the singer, insanely popular. Phil Collins goes solo, insanely popular. So with the same core, you have four different entities that are all-time popular artists. Like, how wild is that? Does that speak to, I guess, the talent of the original Genesis?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously that there was so much going on. It took them a long time to figure out. It's weird too, because they were kind of out here. They were out in sort of left field. They were a prog band, which it was popular style of music at the time when they were doing it, but they were kind of like out there. And slowly but surely, all of them kind of came back to like pop world to a certain degree. I mean, always a little bit off left side, but kind of came back into a place where either the audience came around to them or they came around to writing for the audience or whatever the deal was. I don't know. But you make a really good point, because it's interesting. I can't think of another band that's done that. And here's the funny thing is, I'm a massive Peter Gabriel fan. I'm not really that big of a Genesis fan with him in it. I like Land Lies Down on Broadway, but I don't really know any of their other music.
So. Yeah. So I have just two more points about Peter Gabriel, and then we'll move on to another album. So I have notes from the first time I put the headphones on and I sat down to listen to this album. So again, it kicks off with Intruder, of all songs, right? That's my introduction to the world of Peter Gabriel, is what you believe is like one of the most haunting songs of all time. And here are my notes. Such strange sounds on Intruder, haunting, about being a burglar, xylophone, very eerie and disconcerting sounds. So it's musically, they've done a great job of supporting the dark lyrics. You know what I mean? Like, musically, it's a great representation of what they're trying to get across in the lyrical content.
Oh, he's
like, it's all one congruent picture is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Oh, you're absolutely right. He's a master at that. He's an absolute master at laying down, the landscape musically for what he's talking about lyrically. And even when you don't totally understand what he's talking about lyrically, it's still, the music is there to kind of help you figure it out, or at least help you create your own mental image of what it is that he's trying to convey. But I find with this record, his lyrics are actually quite literal. Like, they're very sort of, you don't have to really read between the lines to figure out what he's talking about. Nothing's really masked. Later on the album after this, it's a little bit more like, oh, what are we talking about here? But this is, yeah, you're right. Yeah. It's disturbing, and they're not trying to make it comfortable for you at all. Ever.
Yeah. And you're saying the lyrics are very literal. I found that he did a great job of painting a picture where it's like every song is a mini movie. So while listening to Intruder for the first time, I'm following the lyrics, and I can actually picture someone breaking into someone's house, and I'm seeing this 4-minute movie unfold based on the sound, which sounds like a horror movie basically, and then the lyrics describing the incident that's about to transpire. So
absolutely. And that's exactly right. And you can hear, if you go and you listen to, like, say, Nine Inch Nails or something like that, you can hear where it's like, oh, okay, you've obviously been listening to this record. And other bands where you can hear that this has influenced them in one way or another, or their approach. to how they, how they do things, for
So
sure.
I have one final quote that I thought you would enjoy. So Rolling Stone says, a tremendous record that sticks in the mind like the haunted heroes of the best film noir.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Couldn't agree with it more. Could not agree with that more.
I thought you would appreciate
Love it.
that quote. So
Love it.
let's dive into your the third album of the top five. So Tom Waits, Mule Variations. This comes out in 1999. It feels like this would have come out long before that.
I,
So I was surprised that this was basically a 2000 album. I was excited to dive into this one specifically because somehow when I was young, I ended up with his album Rain Dogs, which is a great album. And I think the only way I could have ended up with this is, do you remember Columbia House where, it was like 11 cents for 11 albums, and they would send you 11 albums and 9 of them were the wrong album that you'd have to send back. Like it was just a mess. And somehow I ended up with Rain Dogs out of the random albums that got shipped accidentally. And I remember listening and being completely captivated, even though it's, not my genre of music at that time. I'm too young to know what's going on. It's like I was listening to a movie. And
yeah,
you had described it as it's like a hobo, getting on a train describing things.
yeah.
And so I was excited because I'm familiar with Rain Dogs and I appreciate that. And I was excited to dive into a different album of his to kind of further explore the lore that is Tom Waits.
Yeah. If you, I mean, it's not for everybody, right? Because it's challenging. It's a challenging listen. He's a challenging vocalist. Um, he takes on challenging topics to a certain degree, and he presents it in a way that's challenging to listen to. So if you get it, you get it, and you're all in. And if you don't get it, I understand why you wouldn't get it. But to me, that record is kind of like, it's almost like that record to me feels like that's what he's been working towards. That's what everything has been sort of leading up to. That's the culmination of everything. That's where the songwriting and the production and the voice and just the presentation and the band playing behind him, that's when everything sort of hit an apex. And in 1999, like you said, it feels like it would have came out much earlier. Like, who the freak puts out a record like that in 1999? Um, it's just, I remember seeing an interview with Sammy Hagar talking about how unbelievably brave he thought Tom Waits was, and how that was one of his favorite records. And remember thinking, wow, this is really wild. This is Sammy Hagar, who I think at the time was still in Van Halen, going off about how important this record was and how cool it was and how it needed to be made. And I couldn't have agreed with him more. And to make things even worse, I saw him on that tour. And I remember myself sitting in God, it's changed so many names now. I think it was the Hummingbird Center at that point, but now it's I'm not sure what it's called now. In Toronto, it was the Sony Center for a while, the O'Keefe Center at one point. Might have even been the O'Keefe Center when we went, but there was myself, my dear friend Terry Sawchuk, who's a songwriter, sitting next to me. Right next to me is Ron Sexsmith, and right next to him is Jim Cuddy. So there's the four of us sitting there. We're not really talking or
All Canadian legends.
wow, those guys, but not me. But we're I'm just lucky to be hanging. But we're not together. We just happen to be sitting next to each other. Maybe there was somebody in between me and Ron Sexsmith, but we're all kind of in a row. And I can't remember what song he was playing. He was playing, but it was off that record. It might have been Take It With Me. And I'm a mess. I am a freaking mess. I'm like embarrassing myself. And I'm thinking, oh my God, Alf, get it together. These guys are gonna look over at you and just think you are a complete train wreck. And I look over at Terry. He's way worse than I am. He's just bawling. I look over at Ron Sexsmith, tears. Jim Cuddy, tears. I'm like, oh, okay, fine. Just let it go, man. It's not just me. And he's one of those guys that can do that. If you get what he does, you're all in, man. And there was the longest time I couldn't get through the whole Mule Variations record without like tearing up. I just couldn't do it. So yeah. Hold On. Oh my God. That's
So
so,
that's the one single. The album is considered to have one single.
yeah.
It ended up selling over 1 million copies. Like it's somehow more grassroots just because of how great it was. Universal critical acclaim. Just like you mentioned, Jim Cuddy and Ron Sexsmith, Terry Sawchuk. It's like all these other legendary musicians talk about it like it's the greatest thing ever. So all of that over time ended up selling 1 million albums, which is awesome. But I believe Just Hold On is considered a single on there. But you talked about Take It With Me.
Yeah.
That's definitely one of the standout tracks. It's very raw, a very raw recording, piano based. Some of the low notes that he hits are so low that it's almost like not singing. It's almost you have to speak to hit notes that low. And the recording is so raw that when the song finishes, you actually hear him scratch his beard once. Like
Yeah.
that's how raw it was. And I'm like, oh, I think he just finished and scratched his beard.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And the funny thing about it is those guys work really hard on the sounds of those records. Like for the uninitiated listening to that album, you probably think that, man, they threw a cassette in the middle of the room and this thing. But these guys work really, really hard. And there's a lot of interesting sort of like influences coming together there. Like, first of all, his voice alone, like, you start thinking old blues singers like Howlin' Wolf, guys like that. And suddenly Captain Beefheart, even, and you can hear it. You can hear it in his voice. You can hear where his voice is coming from, the gruffness of it and that sort of approach to it. And he didn't always have that. That is something that's kind of evolved, and the way he sounds on Mule Variations compared to the way he sounds on Rain Dogs, you can hear it's the same guy, but it's a much more almost exaggerated, bigger, older kind of thing. And it feels more like sort of a classic old blues sort of voice, like somebody like Howlin' Wolf, somebody along those lines. But you can also tell that he was very influenced by a lot of those records. So records that came out in the 40s and came out in the 30s, and just the way that they recorded them and the sound of those records. So he's definitely going for that aesthetic in what he's doing, where it feels very much like, a microphone in a room and a band playing around it and him singing really loud into this one microphone. And yet that's not what's going on. It's like they're spending a lot of time trying to recreate that thing. So it feels almost haphazard, but it's not haphazard. And his songwriting feels almost haphazard, but it's not in any way haphazard. It's as polished as anything else that's out there. It's just the way that they take the production and the way they present it to you. And they don't make everything perfect. They don't make the playing perfect. They don't make the vocals perfect. They don't make everything about it perfect. And there's points where, like you say, you can hear him scratch his beard. And they'll do things like on earlier records where he's got like a rooster that just shows up in the old song for no reason. You're like, what the hell? Who puts a rooster in this song? Well, Tom Waits does. But having said that, the guy's singing Hold On, or he's singing, Take It With Me. And you're like, oh my God, this is one of the most heartbreaking lyrics I've ever heard. Not heartbreaking in oh my God, it's really sad. Heartbreaking, and it's just so unbelievably beautiful that
The delivery of it.
yeah, the delivery, and it's so heartfelt. Like, it's so heartfelt. It's so honest and I think maybe that's it. Maybe it's honesty.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's the case.
It does sound, again, it sounds like a movie. It does sound like one dude, this one character. Again, there's that homeless dude kind of vibe, very gruff. To me, it sounds like he just allows you into his world for an hour, and the songs are different scenes in a movie. And it's funny to describe it that way because he is an actor. Like, he's been in 40 plus movies. So it's kind of cool that his albums seem like movies and scenes and characters and settings. And it's just very unique. There's nothing else like it.
No, I don't think there's anything else like it. And I remember getting into a discussion with a band I was working with, and they were like, Tom Waits or Bob Dylan. And I'm like, why do we have to have a Tom Waits or Bob Dylan? It doesn't make that doesn't even make sense to me. They're not even in the same like stratosphere. They're like completely different animals.
I think we can do Tom Waits and Bob Dylan
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
greatest of
Yeah.
all time list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like the Beatles or the Stones. You're like, why can't we have both? I love them both. Why not? But with him, yeah, there's the atmosphere that happens with all of the music, and the delivery is so honest and so raw and so heartfelt. But also the lyrics are just, you know, when you sit down and you think about them and what he's saying, the way he puts things, like, hold on. There's a song they hung that what's the lyric? They hung a sign um on the south part of town. If you live it up, you'll never live it down. And I thought, oh my God, that's like me growing up in a small town. Like, I understand that. Who the hell puts that? Like, if you grow up in Espanola, Ontario, where there's like 5,000 people, everybody knows you. Everybody knows what you've been up to. If you were 16 years old and got drunk at a party at somebody's house, everybody knows it. You know, if you did something stupid, everybody knows it. If you got a girl pregnant, everybody knows it. It's like, and that just resonated with me so strongly. And that's the way his music does, man. It's just everything about it. And then I listen to it and, you know, I think, God, how brave to be, you know, a guitar player in his band and put together some of these parts that these guys are playing. Cause in a way it's so adept that it would be, you know, it's very difficult to do in terms of technical ability, yet it sounds like you're a complete buffoon at times, where you just like, you have no idea what you're doing, you know. That's it takes a lot of bravery to do something like that for me.
Yeah, we're talking Tom Waits. We mentioned Bob Dylan. I do hear a little Bob Dylan influence in there. You know, and maybe vocally you can compare it slightly because they don't have the, you know, Mariah Carey all out vocalist. They have kind of the gruff spoken word. I find that Tom Waits, I guess I assumed he wasn't a great singer before diving into this stuff. But in listening to the album, he's a really good singer. Like
Oh,
he doesn't have this natural, beautiful tone to his voice, but he can really sing. Like the performance, he's hitting certain notes. So I think he's a better singer than maybe he gets credit for. And
oh,
I feel like live it would actually be better than you think.
you know what? I can say this about seeing him live, at least when I saw him live, what you don't expect. Like when you walk in and you see the setup for the concert before anybody's on stage, it literally looks like it's in a garage. Like it looks like an auto mechanics garage, like, you know, the way the lights are hung, and they have like these lights that come down, and they're just white lights, and they're on, and they're over this, like, you know, a drum kit that the kick drum's way too big, and then all this percussion stuff that he's made. And there's a pump organ over on one side, and then, you know, an upright bass and whatever. And there's nobody on the stage, but it just, everything looks dusty and it looks old and it looks like it's in a garage. It really does. And then they come out on stage, and it might be one of the best lighting shows I've ever seen in my life. And I'm like, I wasn't expecting the concert. You know, I was expecting, like, when I saw the thing, I was like, oh, he's going to come out and they're going to play, and this is what it's going to look like. And it's nothing like that. The lights go down, and all of a sudden it's just this unbelievably cool, cool lighting, cool, like really interesting, sort of an original kind of delivery for performance, and so on and so forth. So it was just unbelievably cool.
What's funny is the two best live shows I've seen as far as lighting. You've mentioned both bands. So Radiohead and Nine Inch Nails had the best light shows I've ever seen.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, the Nine Inch Nails thing is crazy. Crazy, crazy, crazy. I haven't seen Radiohead yet. I would like to do that. My partner saw them. She was very excited. She went by herself and saw them.
I saw them in Montreal when I was 17, so it wasn't even legal to drink. But in Montreal, Quebec, they don't care. We went from bar to bar to bar leading up to the concert. Never got ID'd once, and it was, I had never seen anything like it. Where, you know, normally if you go to a festival, it's like at the festival there could be 20,000, 30,000, maybe 50,000 people, and it's because there's 20 bands together, all their fan bases can bring that out. Radiohead, it was just Radiohead, and there were 60,000 people there.
Oh yeah. Well, it's, they're just the Radiohead. I don't even know how to explain it, but it's like what, they're Radiohead. You either get it or you don't get it. But boy, if you get it, do you get it? Now I feel Tom Waits kind of like that, If you get it, boy, do you get it. And if you don't get it, boy, do you not get it.
What's awesome about this album is he's one of those guys where it's like musicians loved him, but he hadn't broken through as far as sales and mainstream and radio play yet. And it felt like this album finally gave him his dues. So he won a Grammy for it, and he was nominated for a second Grammy for it. We mentioned that it did end up selling over 1 million copies. So it was nice to see him finally get that outside of the critical acclaim to get the, I guess, the financial or the commercial,
Well, I think he did pretty good before that because there were a lot of people that covered his songs, like Rod Stewart covered Downtown Train and it was a hit. It was a huge hit. And I know Springsteen sang Jersey Girl. I don't know if he ever recorded it outside of playing it live. Or sorry, outside of like a live recording, if you ever record it. But like if you got somebody like Bruce Springsteen covering one of your songs, Jesus.
And I think also live he was doing well. Like he had a cult following, and I think touring wise, it's just album sales wise, it finally caught up. You mentioned Bruce Springsteen. I actually heard a little Bruce Springsteen vocal influence in there as well on at least one of the songs, just like I heard Bob Dylan.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. But that's interesting because they would have started around the same time. So
okay, so maybe just two guys with similar timbres to their voice.
Who influenced who, right?
Yeah, that's true. So I actually heard this album. So I was more familiar with Rain Dogs because I owned it. But I had actually heard this album once a few years ago because Rolling Stone put out a list of the 500 greatest albums of all time. This showed up at number 416. And I'm such a music nerd. I spent a year and I listened to the entire 500 albums, which is 400 to 500 hours of music. So when I dove back into this album for this episode, I remembered Big in Japan. Like it's such a unique song that when that kicked in, I was like, oh yeah, okay, I remember this album, Big in Japan. And what's cool is Les Claypool from Primus plays bass on Big in Japan, which I did not know.
Yeah, well, Tom Waits is on Tommy the Cat or whatever on a Primus record, right? So they're buddies. But yeah, that song, I mean, that's the other thing about this record is there's a sense of humor. That's like Big in Japan is hilarious. The song's hilarious. And that's the other thing, Chocolate Jesus. The song is hilarious. Filipino box spring hog. Oh my God. This one, like I was rolling around on the ground laughing so that's the thing. It's like it goes from this point where you're like, I remember walking out from his live show thinking, I just got my ass kicked in the best way I've ever had it kicked. And I laughed, I cried, and I definitely became a better person for seeing it. And I meant that wholeheartedly. I wasn't actually joking. And that record is kind of like that, like if you get into Filipino box spring hog and you're listening, or what's he building in there? Like who puts that on an album? You're peering over, you're like the nosy neighbor. What's he building in there? And just the way he delivers it. And you're like, what am I listening to? This is incredible. So yeah, man, that record's so good.
The last thing I'll say about the Mule Variations album is you said that his greatest strength is as a songwriter. To you, it was with this album, it's the lyrics, it's the songwriting above everything else. And Rolling Stone agrees with you. So they made a list, the 100 greatest songwriters of all time. He's not just on the list, he's number 55. Like he's almost in the top half of all time. I thought you would appreciate that.
I do appreciate that. I'm saddened that they left him at 55. I think he's like 3 or something, but that's, that's neither here nor there. But God, yeah, it's mind blowing how good this guy is, and apparently a really wonderful human being.
So we have 2 more albums to go. So let's jump into Sparkle Horse. I'll do my best here. Viva Dixie Submarine Transmission Plot from 1995. How'd I do?
You did fantastic. You did amazing.
Okay.
We could just call it Viva Dixie if you want.
We'll call it Viva Dixie.
Yeah, there's so many songs on this that I'm actually going into. I'm just going to call the list up of the songs. Okay.
Just so it's actually a pretty long album. It's not, 10 songs, it's like 15 or 16 or something.
16 songs. But here's the funny thing. It's 16 songs, according to this January 1st, 1995, 47 minutes, 29 seconds.
There's a couple short instrumentals that
that are just weird. But
I was going to ask you, I guess we can just dive right into that. What do you think the purpose is of having those short instrumentals that are more just noises or sounds? Bands like Tool do this, where they're building a certain aura and a feeling, or it's to help transition from song 1 to song 3. Sonically they can't quite get there back to back, and they have a transition with the instrumental. Why do you think they have these two instrumentals there, or what do those mean to you?
I think, in some cases it's a way to sort of create a palette for the rest of the record and break up the song, so it's not just song, and make it more of a listening experience for the listener. I mean, I'm speculating, but the way that it's done on this record, it almost seems like it's kind of haphazard to a certain degree. Like, it doesn't feel like it's really like they really thought this, or he really thought this out. But when you listen to the record enough times, you think, no, this is really well constructed. It's the way that it's supposed to. But again, it's that sort of like, if Tom Waits if that's a soundtrack of a hobo on a train, then this one is kind of like, a drunken car mechanic in the woods or something. Like, it's just bizarre. It's a bizarre record.
I feel like that should be part of the official review, like on Wikipedia.
Just
that was good.
I mean, it's a sad story because he ended up killing himself, right? But and he's got quite the output. It's not just this record. He's put out a lot of records, like, produced things for other people and worked with Dead Mouse, for crying out loud. Or not Dead Mouse, but Danger Mouse.
Danger Mouse, yeah.
Yeah, I always get the mice confused.
Do you remember how Danger Mouse broke through to the mainstream? Do you remember what it was that broke him through? So Danger Mouse was an unknown producer, and he went and he took the Beatles' White Album and the Jay-Z Black Album, and he somehow mixed them together and made the Gray Album. And it became this underground hit that the whole world was like, how did he do this? This is incredible. And then like lawsuits come out because you can't just have, manipulate Jay-Z and, two of the biggest artists of all time in the Beatles. And it made such a buzz that he became like the hottest producer in the world. That's the history of Danger Mouse.
I wasn't aware of any of that. I think
so. There's a famous Gray album out there.
I think the first time he came on my radar would have been Gorillaz. Yeah, I think Gorillaz. But yeah, but anyway, yeah, getting back to this guy, this record is like,
yeah, it doesn't have the same gloss as the other albums, just like you mentioned. But do you think that's a part of what makes it endearing, and that's a part of the appeal, is that lack of gloss?
I think I can speak on this a little bit because in that period of time, 1997 or whatever, there was a big, you got to remember, like, Nirvana came out and sort of shook the world up with Nevermind, but then they came out with Heart Shaped Box. And if you, or is that what's
In Utero?
In Utero, so Heart Shaped Box being the single. That's right. But if you go back and you listen to Nevermind and you listen to In Utero, Nevermind sounds like slick as hell by comparison. And sort of what was happening, and I remember this because I was making records in during that period of time, and we were consistently trying to make everything that we were doing more lo-fi, more lo-fi, more lo-fi, more lo-fi, more lo-fi. This is way precursor to the lo-fi movement now. Because it's an aesthetic, and there's a certain honesty that I think people can relate to, and it doesn't have that sheen and that gloss of a lot of the other stuff that was going on at the time. Because you got to remember, it's like, I remember working at Wellesley Sound. I think I was working in the tape dubbing room, and we had Q107, which was the big radio station in Toronto, on at the time, all the time, and you could hear Life is a Highway and Nirvana and Pearl Jam at the same time. So there's a big difference going on there, and a big transition sort of happening. And slowly but surely, it's like things got grungier and uglier and darker and, well, not maybe not necessarily darker, but more lo-fi, more lo-fi, more lo-fi. And I think a sense of honesty on this record because of the way that it sounds. Like it sounds at times where it was recorded on a 4-track cassette, and it very well may have been that that's a song that it was just like, this is the way that the song is supposed to sound, and I'm doing it in my kitchen or whatever, and there it is. And that aesthetic kind of goes through the whole thing. But then you have like this unbelievable take on, like Homecoming Queen, Rainmaker, Spirit Ditch, Tears on Fresh Fruit, Cow. Like the outro, Cow, is unbelievable. Like it's just so musical and so emotional. And who writes a freaking chorus, a pretty girl milking a cow? Like who does that, But it's a challenge. It's a challenge to get through those 16 songs. There's no question about it.
And how did you initially discover this album? How does this come to your attention? Because this is so Sparkle Horse is another one of the bands where it seemed like people in the know loved it. Other musicians loved it. They were like critical darlings of musicians, but just the fan base didn't show up. Like there wasn't hit singles, there wasn't big album sales.
No, God, there wasn't big. I don't think there was big album sales. I would never have known of this record. I was doing a session at Hypnotic Studios, and we were doing Blue Rodeo. And I think I mentioned this when we spoke before, but the Blue Rodeo sessions that I did were based around they were trying to raise money and awareness for Leonard Pelche, who had been wrongfully convicted for, I think it was killing an FBI agent. And there's a whole bunch of who's of Canadian artists that were on this record, like Sarah McLachlan was on it, and it's a big deal. And during the session, somebody had mentioned Sparkle Horse, and I think it might have been Jim Cuddy, and he was just talking about, oh my God, have you heard this? And we were like, no. And he was, and I think he said, just don't even hesitate, just go buy it. And I did. I went out and bought it because I'm thinking, man, it's like, one of the best songwriters I've ever worked with is telling me to go buy this. I should probably go buy this. So I went and I bought it and I put it on, and Homecoming Queen comes on, which is warped, and it sounds like the tape is all warped, kind of strange, and the instruments are kind of like, what the hell? And he starts singing, and it broke my heart. And I was captivated from that point on. And I just almost wore that CD out. I just completely fell in love with it, every aspect of it. And at the same time, we were sort of like going down that road aesthetically in terms of, I was working a lot with Darren Barry, who owns the Orange Lounge recording studio. And I think we did the Maid record somewhere around there, which is a lo-fi album. And I did Hayden for the Trees Lounge soundtrack.
Love Hayden.
Yeah. So do I. Love him. Wonderful human being. And that's a lo-fi thing. And so I was very much, my head was in that world, right? And so this record just resonated with me.
So I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't fact check this story with members of Blue Rodeo themselves. So I have a quote here. This is from Glenn Milcham, Blue Rodeo drummer. He's sharing his love of the album to help paint that picture. So this is what Glenn says. He says, Basil Donovan, our bass player, is also a big Sparkle Horse fan. Right. Yeah. I love the simple, beautiful songs, the dark, surreal, and introspective lyrics, and the raw, intimate production. Mark Linkous, which is the singer from Sparkle Horse, was one of those terminally depressed songwriters who came to a tragic end, but somehow still managed to capture a lot of beauty in his writing. David Berman of Silver Jews and Purple Mountains, and Jason Molina of Songs Ohio and Magnolia Electric Company also come to mind as being members of this unfortunate club. So that's what Glenn has to say about that album.
Yeah, he's right. In fact, I do remember it was probably even Basil that sparked the conversation in the studio. And of course, when they played, I saw them at the Horseshoe.
No way.
Yeah, I saw them at the Horseshoe, and he had it was an odd accident. You can read about this. I don't remember exactly what happened, but I think obviously there were, he suffered from serious depression and some, there were drugs involved and whatnot. And I think he had either passed out or whatever in some weird, awkward position where it cut the blood supply off to his legs.
Yeah.
lost like the use of his legs or whatever. So when I saw him at the Horseshoe, he was in a chair. Like he was sitting in a chair, and you could see like he would like grab his leg and sort of like lift it up and let his leg drop on a guitar pedal. And it was just like, what the hell? This is unbelievable. But they sounded live virtually identical to the way the record sounded. And I thought, Jesus, there's a really, really good example of how the performance was captured on the record, and just that's what it sounds like. How did you make that record sound like that? Oh, that's easy. They put the mics up in the room, and that's what it sounds like.
I guess that's one of the perks of doing a lo-fi record is it's easier to reproduce live.
It's easier to reproduce live, but it's not easy to capture it.
Hmm.
It's really hard. It's hard. This is going to be funny, but it's hard to make shitty sounds, you know? And because sometimes if you do it the wrong way, it just sounds bad. If you do it the right way, it sounds kind of cool and compelling, but it's really, really difficult to make things that don't sound all that great the uninitiated into that world, right?
Do you think a part of that is because technology and equipment has gotten so good now that things just naturally sound great? So you actually have to work to like reverse engineer to make it sound less polished and great?
And I think that's why, there's some really interesting movements going on right now where people are recording on 4-track cassette machines and things, because there's a certain way that it reproduces the sound, and it kind of glues together the performance that, yeah, it's not perfect, but it's honest. And I appreciate that. I mean, I spent enough time in that world that I definitely appreciate that. I also, like things like Talk Talk that sound like, God mixed them.
I actually have the story here about what happened to him and his legs. I thought it was
Okay.
worth mentioning just for our listeners that aren't familiar. So it's funny because it mentions Radiohead again here. So in 1996, while touring Europe with Radiohead, shortly after the album's release, Mark Linkous consumed a combination of antidepressants, Valium, alcohol, heroin, and other drugs in a London hotel room. Unconscious and with his legs pinned beneath him for almost 14 hours, the resulting potassium buildup caused his heart to stop for several minutes after his body was lifted up. The ensuing surgery almost caused him to lose the use of both legs, and as a result, he needed to use a wheelchair for 6 months, and he required dialysis for acute kidney failure. And apparently his legs never recovered. Like they got a little better, but they never fully recovered, which is what you're saying.
Yeah. It was, you could see that you were seeing somebody in trouble. Like there was, I don't know, again, an honesty to the performance, and it sounded like it wasn't loud. I remember being a really, really quiet PA, and just a lot of people sort of like sitting there listening to this, and it was uncomfortable to watch, but it was also just, it was so riveting. And
You
he sounded exactly the way he does on the record.
you were talking about the lo-fi recordings, and some people are going back and recording on 4-track. On Facebook, I don't know if you know producer engineer Siegfried Meyer.
Yeah, of course. I don't know him. I don't know him. I've never met him. I mixed something that he recorded 2 years ago, but yeah.
Okay, so when I was 18, I went to school for audio engineering in London, Ontario. I went to OE Art, and he was there either as a guest speaker or a teacher or something. So that's our connection way back, more than half my life ago now as time flies by. But I just saw him post. He does a lot of videos to do with mixing and recording and all that stuff. And he posted a little cassette recorder, and he goes, "Oh, look what I found." And he goes, "What's amazing about this is the natural microphone on it has this built-in compressor." And he goes, "Almost everything sounds great." So he puts it in front of a drum kit, and he's in an actual studio, and he just wails on the drums. And when he plays it back, it sounded so incredible. And it was just through this little self-compressed mic on a tape recorder.
I used to love going into any rehearsal space with a band and pre-production. We had the boom box, and the boom box had, microphone or two microphones on it if it was really crazy. And they always had the compressor, and you pop it in a recorder, and the band would start playing, and it just sounded unbelievable. When you play it back, you're like, yeah, this is so cool because of that thing, right? But that's, that's been going on for forever. Like the Peter Gabriel thing, they did that. That's that whole background vocal thing. Again, I don't know if any of that was employed on this record, but you go back and you listen to um God, I'm blanking, but Rolling Stones songs. Um Jumpin' Jack Flash, for instance, is not an electric guitar. It's an overloaded acoustic guitar recorded onto a cassette, played back from the cassette, remiked through a speaker, and then flown onto the tape. So, this concept has been going on for a long time.
So my initial reaction when listening to the album for the first time, so I was actually at the gym. So I remember like it's leg day. Leg day sucks. This music is like a great soundtrack to doing leg day. And I just remember thinking like, man, this is like a beautiful collection of songs. So a lot of times you can't say that about music. Like you wouldn't say like,
No.
I don't know, that Metallica song is beautiful. Like not all music you can say that to, but I found that there was something endearing about the album. There was a beauty, to the songs. I found that the album was a mix of like ballads, solo acoustic songs, and then kind of raw indie rock. Is that an accurate description of what's on there?
Yeah, it's a great description of it. That's exactly what it is. And there's songs that are more produced than other ones, and it always, there's an honesty in that record, and melody. The melodies are fantastic, and the lyrics are just so left field. Who writes a song about a beautiful widow, or like I was saying, a girl milking a cow, or homecoming queen, which is actually, that in itself is not that unique, but just the way it's presented is like, whoa. Yeah, there's just really, someday I will treat you right. Your own failings as a human being in a relationship. It's just a really, really, really honest record. And I think, in a weird way, it's like the baby brother to the Tom Waits record, whereas the Tom Waits record is kind of like a much bigger production and much bigger sound, even though it's still kind of lo-fi. This is like really lo-fi. I mean, it's not guided by voices lo-fi, but it's lo-fi.
And what ties us together is it turns out that all-time great artists like PJ Harvey and Tom Waits actually loved that album.
Oh, yeah.
So to tie, we're talking about Tom Waits and then we're talking about this album. Tom Waits was actually a big fan of this
I
album.
can't see how you couldn't be a songwriter and not at least see the value of it. Maybe not love it, but at least just be enamored by it. And again, this is one of these things where I've worked with bands who are very much into Sparkle Horse who didn't know about this record. And I was like, that's funny because I don't know any other records.
I guess they have like 4 or 5 records too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I had compared which band was it? Was it Talk Talk? I compared the singer to Roxy Music. And in this case, while I'm listening, I'm hearing a little bit of Elliott Smith.
Oh yeah. God, yeah.
And again, where I said it's not a lot of artists where you can say the music or the songs are beautiful. And Elliott Smith is one of those artists where you listen and you're like, wow, that's a beautiful song or beautiful melody. So I heard a little bit of Elliott Smith in this. And what is kind of crazy is Elliott Smith is another one of those tortured artists that killed himself. And I don't know if this is true, but I've heard Elliott Smith killed himself by sticking a knife in his own heart, like of all the singer-songwriter poetic ways to go. And then Mark Linkous of Sparkle Horse apparently shot himself in the heart. And it like kind of ties those two super gifted, haunted, tragic singer-songwriters, kind of puts them both together.
And it just goes to show you how much, the humanity involved behind it. Right. Yeah, it's heartbreaking in both cases. I remember hearing Needle in the Hay and just losing my mind, thinking, oh my God, this might be the best song I think I've ever heard. The Elliott Smith track, Needle in the Hay. And And yeah, there's a very strong similarity going on between the two of them. You can hear it, you know.
Let's dive into the final album here. So Talking Heads Stop Making Sense. This comes out in 1984. What's funny is we did the 2 hour deep dive, and I'm like, okay, this will probably be an hour, maybe an hour and a half. We're already over 2 hours with an album to go.
Sorry,
So just,
I
we're
apologize.
no. We're just a bunch of chatty Cathys here that we're catching up as we go.
Yeah, that's true. But I do apologize. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to keep you that long.
No, hey, look, you're the one that's got stuff to do. This is what I do. I'm supposed to be here talking to people. So, yeah, no, nothing to apologize for. I just thought it was funny that somehow I thought this would be an hour and a half. There's too much good music to talk about. There's too many
That's true.
backstories to these albums. Too many things that need to be said. So, Talking Heads Stop Making Sense. Why is this on your top 5 list?
Oh, because when I was growing up, Talking Heads were the coolest thing on the radio, period. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The first time I heard Burning Down the House, I heard Burning Down the House before I heard a Once in a Lifetime. And I couldn't believe it. And I was hearing it coming out of the radio in Sudbury, and I was in high school. And I had friends around me that were listening to Talking Heads, and they were big fans of it, but I hadn't really either gotten into it yet or whatever. I wasn't that aware of it, but I heard Burning Down the House and I thought, holy crap. I don't even know how to explain this. This is incredible. And of course, by the time I hear them, they've already got, 5-6 albums under their belt or something. So they're a well-oiled machine. And I went out and bought Speaking in Tongues, and Speaking in Tongues for me is just a brilliant record from beginning to end. And that, of course, led to me hearing Once in a Lifetime. But the first time I heard Once in a Lifetime, I actually heard it on the Stop Making Sense CD. So I don't think I'd heard it, the actual version of it. And I just fell in love with that CD. But the thing about, by the time I heard them, they had a whole bunch of records out. But their catalog to me is so much better than just the record that I was listening to. That the thing about Stop Making Sense is that it there's a period that I really, really love, right? The Remain in Light, Speaking in Tongues period of Talking Heads is the part that I absolutely love. I like the stuff before it. I like the stuff after it, but that is for me everything. And so this focuses on all of these songs that they've written before either of those two records, including songs that they've written on both those two records. It's long enough that it can encompass all of it, but they do it in a style where they were there, where it's very much in keeping with where they were at when they did Speaking in Tongues musically. So instrumentally, it made a lot of sense. By that time, the band was that slick and they could do it. And then, of course, I saw the movie for it and I just lost my mind completely. And I was like, this might be the coolest concert video anybody ever does, let alone this is whatever. And so that's why that record means so much to me. It's because that band meant a lot to me. But that was the sort of the point where it all clicked. I kind of went, oh, it all snapped into focus and made absolute sense. And they packaged it in a way that made sense because it sounds like even Psycho Killer and those songs, which were done much earlier, feel like, or like during wartime or whatever, they feel like the way that they were presenting music when they did Speaking in Tongues. And so that's why. And his lyrics are like, come on, like, give me a break. The guy's an unbelievable songwriter.
It's basically a greatest hits album, but live.
Yeah, it's a greatest hits album, but live and performed live with extra musicians on board. And it's just, yeah.
So would you say Burning Down the House and Psycho Killer would be the two most popular Talking Head songs that most people would know?
I think probably, but also Once in a Lifetime is big too. But there's like, you used to have songs like Naive Melody, which you see in movies and things like that. So, but you're probably right. I would imagine Burning Down the House and Psycho Killer are probably the two that people can relate to the most. Because Psycho Killer is just, again, it's kind of disturbing but weird. And
yeah, Burning Down the House is such a strange song to be a hit, but it also sounds like a hit. You know what I mean? Like it might be the most awkward strange hit ever, but still undeniably a hit when it gets to the chorus, you know?
Great way to put it. But you know, Burning Down the House is kind of like Sledgehammer, right? Peter Gabriel Sledgehammer, where you first time you hear it, you go, that's just an awkward Motown tune. Like that's Motown done by somebody who can't really get the Motown thing happening without making it weird sounding. And I find the same way with like Burning Down the House. It's just there's no other way that that band could have produced that song and made it sound whatever. And it's just that, you know, the public kind of came around to them as opposed to them going the other way around. I think that's the other thing that I really appreciate about that record is that it's just very honest for what they sounded like. It's very honest.
So I listened to the live album. I haven't seen the live concert. The live concert is considered one of the best, you know, live DVDs or live concerts ever. What am I missing by just listening and not getting the visuals of it?
Well, I think that's how strong it is that you don't have to get the visuals out, but there's a certain thing that when you see it performed live in that, because the concert itself, the actual record is just, it's so well done. It's so well performed. It's so well played. It's so well mixed and recorded and produced that you don't need the video. It would have stood on its own. I'm thoroughly convinced that it would have stood on its own as just an album. But when you see the movie, you realize that there's a whole other level that you're not getting of what's going on with these songs and how they're performed and what's happening during that concert. And just the unique as, okay, so let me try and encompass it in that the way that you describe Burning Down the House as being this undeniable hit, but really incredibly awkward, right? There's that kind of weird sort of like level, like depth to it. The movie's like that. When you see them perform it, you're just like, what is going on? Like, this is just, you know, it's not your typical rock show. Let's just put it that way. It's like nothing like your typical rock show.
So even though this is a live album, at least when you're just listening and not watching, it was still a big hit. So this goes double platinum. It stayed on the charts for over 2 years on the Billboard Top 200, which is wild. And that list of 500 greatest albums of all time, it's even higher than the Tom Waits album. It's number 345, which is for a live album. You know, you think they would pick. There's other studio albums from Talking Heads on there. I think they have like 4 albums total on that 500 list, but yeah, so it was a big hit. When I'm listening, to me, it's a collection of awesome songs that are like really unique and strange. It's just like a strange collection of songs. And you were saying like, what other band could pull that off? Just the strangeness, but still be that popular.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, I mean, he's got such a compelling voice to listen to. And his delivery is so honest, even though it's weird and quirky and whatever. It's just really, really honest, and there's no pretense to any of it. But it just goes to show you how important groove is. Like, groove is so important in that band. Grooves, man, those guys are, you know, it is stiff. It's a stiff groove, but it is a groove. And you know, Tina Weymouth, what a bass player. Like, I don't even know how to explain it. You should write bass lines with like 2 notes, and they're the best bass lines you ever hear. So,
yeah. Was this the album you were saying there's something about the key signatures? There's lots of changes in key signatures, or
no.
That was shocking of how you can actually get through all the different keys that smoothly.
No, God, no, that's Talk.
So I'm mixing. This is what's funny is you gave me your favorite albums, and there was Talk and then Talking Heads, and I was like, oh, you just like the Talk bands. I thought July Talk would be another one.
Yeah, right.
So I'm mixing up your comment about Talk instead of Talking Heads.
Oh, I do. July Talk have a song called Guns and Ammunition or something?
Yeah. There's a guy singer and a girl singer, and the guy's voice is like Crash Test Dummies low, like super low,
and kind of like gruff, like Tom Waits, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, they had a song, I think it was Guns and Ammunition. I thought it was really cool.
So yeah, we can forget about the key signatures because we're on to a different
that's
album.
Definitely Talk. That's, in fact, that's living in another world, but they do it all the time. It's crazy.
All good. So I have 3 reviews that I thought you would enjoy for this album, and then we'll wrap up. So Empire says it's a bona fide classic, a perfectly measured snapshot of a widely loved and respected band playing at the height of their powers. No other band could do this. No other music movie soundtrack sounds this good. So that's Empire. Q Magazine says a timely reminder of the achievements of perhaps the most underrated band of the post-punk age. And so those are the only two comments. And then the last thing I would say is, as I look through all these all-time great albums, almost all of them are mastered by Ted Jensen at Sterling Sound. Is he like the biggest mastering engineer of all time? His name, so the 5 albums with Rich, he had mastered, I don't know, 2 or 3 of them. And then here in only the second episode, again, it's him having mastered some of the albums here.
You know, Ted Jensen, Bob Ludwig, George Marino, Howie Weinberg. Those were guys that I think Howie did the Big Sugar record behind you.
I got a Big Sugar shirt on here.
Here you go.
Too. Woo.
Ooh, hang on. We're gonna have to send you some Eon swag.
That was in your honor. I knew you worked with them, so I got a little Big Sugar, but I'm too close up here. You know, you can't see what I'm wearing.
That's awesome. But yeah, those were the guys. So it's not surprising. Bernie Grunman, I think, was another guy. Brian Gardner. There was a bunch of mastering guys that were kind of doing pretty much everything at that point. And yeah, Ted Jensen is definitely one of them for sure.
So final questions. Can you handle 2 or 3 more fast questions and we'll get out of here? All right. Yep. Do you have any honorable mention albums? So I know it was easy to pick 1 or 2 of the 5, but it was hard out of all the albums you love to get to a final 5. Are there any that hover just outside of your top 5 that on any other day, you know, if I asked you on a Wednesday, you would have put a different album in there? I think, was it Blue Nile you had mentioned to me that you love?
Yeah, the Blue Nile, the both their records really. They had a record called Hats and another record called Walk Across the Rooftops, which are just the guy's voice and his songwriting. And yeah, and to be honest with you, I probably didn't, for whatever reason, they slipped my mind, and that's why they're not on that list. But yeah, absolutely. But you know, conversely, AC/DC, Highway to Hell, Back in Black. There's about at least 3 or 4 AC/DC records. For those who want blood, it's just unbelievable, honest song integrity, songwriting, crazy. Geez, Rolling Stones, Sticky Fingered. You know, can't you hear me knocking? Are you kidding me with that guitar track? That is unbelievable, undeniable. Aerosmith rocks. You know, there's some really weird shit going on with Steven Tyler and Depressed right now, but that track, that album to me is like really undeniable, and you can't.
That album was surprisingly heavy when I listened.
So
you know, I think of Aerosmith and, you know, some of the pop hits like Crying and you know, I Don't Want to Miss a Thing and whatever. And then you listen to Rocks and it's like, that's like a metal album.
Oh, they're a rock band, man. Toys in the Attic, Rocks, Draw the Line. They're a rock band. That is a rock band. I don't care what happened after that. That is a rock band. That's how that band started. God, yeah, there's just so many records, you know.
All right. What is the album that you love that our listeners would be shocked that you love? Like, is there a kind of guilty pleasure in there at all? Or some, you know, you have a rock image, but there's this, you know, one rap album you love, or is there something that you almost listen to when you're alone in the basement and no one's around? Come on, not everything you listen to is cool. I don't know, or that's just out of character, you know? I'm a big Taylor Swift fan. I'm just going to drop that. People wouldn't think that to be true. So I am giving you a slate here that you can say.
Yeah. No, I'm trying to think of something that let me see, because I probably looked at it recently on Spotify. So I'm just going to take a moment here and
look through your search history or something.
Anything. Oh, you know what I'm a huge fan of? Sorry. What am I? Duh. Stupid me. Huge fan of pre-50s blues. Like, oddly enough, like Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Thorpe, and that was isn't really pre-50s blues, but things like that. There are some gospel things that I'm just absolutely enamored with. I'm not bent in that direction spiritually, but I can't deny the music. I just absolutely love it. But a lot of the old blues stuff. Um, I got turned on to um, not that long ago. Really, not that long ago. I'm new to the game on this one, and and that stuff just steals my heart. I love it. But I'm also a big fan of really old time country.
Like
Like
old honky tonk country,
yeah, yeah,
or
yeah, yeah. Like going way back. Like Jimmy. Hang on, I got a whole playlist of
is
it.
this like Hank Williams and stuff, or
Oh yeah, Hank Williams. Um, Patsy Cline, obviously. Willie Nelson, but Willie Nelson when he first started out, when he was like just almost a janitor. Um, yeah, just a lot of that stuff just kind of so good. Graham Parsons is another guy. I love Graham Parsons. Sweetheart of the Rodeo era, Birds, that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm
okay.
a big country fan too.
All right. So we have uh a thing that we do at the podcast where a current guest will provide a question that we will then ask the next guest without knowing who it is, male, female, age, profession, just a general question. You put it up into the ether of the podcast and it comes down in the next episode and it ties all the episodes together. So the last guest was Rich Bedeau, drummer from Finger 11 Saint Asonia. And he's got a strange question. So he, without knowing it would be you, he
Yeah,
says, if you could go back in time and choose just one person to kill and one person to kiss,
yeah.
who would those people be? So very strange. I don't know how to answer this. You could have fun with it. I don't know what you come up with.
One person to kill. That's easy. Hitler.
So that might be the only
It's about the only thing that
politically correct answer you can give is Hitler. I think everyone's
and I'm
okay.
not even trying to be politically correct, but I just that man should
Yeah.
never have existed. Um,
I think that's the only right answer. So gold star, and then
mm,
one person to kiss.
oh, my mom.
Oh, geez, man, you how do you pull out the two best possible answers?
Oh, my mom, man. I lost
Well,
her in 2013. If I could go back, that'd be the first thing I would do.
I think those are perfect answers. And now, can you, without knowing the next guest, can you provide a question? It could be funny, it could be silly, it could be serious, it could be inspiring.
So,
Does anything come to mind right now?
yeah, if there's anybody that you could go back and take slap shots at, who would it be? That would be one. And if there was anybody who you could co-write a song with, who would it be? That would be two. But definitely the hockey one is important.
Sounds good. So, schedules change, things change. I think I have Ricky Pocket of the Sheepdogs multi-platinum group on next.
Oh,
So this works out because he's a Canadian boy from, Ottawa, right? You have a history here. So he's originally from Gatineau, so just across
yeah.
the bridge.
Why
And
those guys were from out west?
so he's the newest member. So they came in and from out west, they came all the way here to get a heavy hitter. Um,
Right.
and he probably plays hockey and he's definitely a songwriter. So your question will fit in right there. I believe he should be the next guest. So that's perfect. So where can our listeners find you? So if they want to if they want to see what you're up to with any updates, or if they want to slide into the DMs and say they love the interview,
Yeah,
or say they love your music or want to work with you or anything, where do they
absolutely.
go?
Oh, you can reach me on Facebook. And you can just find me as Alfio Annibalini on Facebook. And I think it's Alpha 49. I'm not even really sure what my identity is on Instagram, but you can find me.
Just first and last name now. It's easy to Google this stuff,
And
right?
yeah, exactly. And I'm on Twitter. And yeah, that's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. And I typically answer everything pretty quickly. So
Perfect. And do you have any final words as we wrap up for the fans that have been supporting you, with your career and also over the last 9 months with Envy of None? Any final words for the fans that really care?
well, it's really appreciated. And incredibly honored and humbled that people are paying any kind of attention at all, let alone enjoying it and enjoying any of it for that matter. And I'm also incredibly lucky because I get to work with really good people all the time and hang out with guys like you from time to time as well. So,
Oh, what an honor. What an honor. There you go. Amazing. So, Alf, it's been a pleasure. It's always awesome to sit down with you and pick your brain and thank you for the 5 album recommendations that allowed me to go and listen to some all-time great music that maybe I wasn't familiar with. And I really appreciate it. Thank you for spending 2.5 hours with me here. So
I'm so sorry. I can't.
No, we're gonna push for 3 next time. So Alf, thank you for your time, and to the fans, the Alf fans, the Envy of None fans, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Take care.
If you've enjoyed today's episode of the podcast, please take a moment to subscribe, like, comment, and share. What I want to know is, who would you like me to sit down with next for a 2-hour deep dive interview? You can let me know by reaching out to me on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Joel Martin Mastery. Joel is Joel. And you can find me on Twitter and Snapchat at Joel Mastery. So I am done. I am complete. I approve this message, and I'll see you on the next episode.